Some of them feel like if you protest in America, you get automatically arrested. I don't blame them. What the media they see, like the hyper-militarization of police. How do you like to build up that confidence with small business owners?
I honestly, we did not do a lot of
small business outreach.
Yeah, we did on the street talking to people, so I have no idea.
Gotcha.
And they don't want. I have done other work with small businesses in East Harlem. They do not want to talk to anybody. Manager's not here, manager's not here.
Yeah, that's real.
They're month to month. They don't even, half of them don't even have leases.
Yeah.
They sublease and they have no rights.
Gotcha, yeah.
And a lot of the buildings in East Harlem along 3rd Avenue, they're all empty, abandoned apartment units and just commercial storefronts in the bottom, and they have zero rights. Like,
what we were experiencing in Jackson Heights, a lot of the small businesses are like shell companies. So it's somebody from an international that hires somebody locally to manage it, but really they don't have a lot to say in terms of like what should they do and organize politically.
Yeah.
So it's been tough. It's been tough. But we got a couple of small businesses that come out, and so recently we voted for in Jackson Heights. They voted no, an absolute no to the rezoning with recommendation of downsizing.
Well, let me backtrack, because I do now. You mentioned 125th Street was a whole separate sort of rezoning, but there was one section that had nothing to do so much with rezoning as eminent domain. So there were a number of businesses that sued the city because they were eminent domained out. Including the dry clean depot, auto body, and they've been there for years and years, and they sued unsuccessfully. But I could put you in touch with them, because they're still, I don't know where their case is, but they
one strategy to look at. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Marina.
Sure. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Yes. So he just gave us the, do you know how to work the remote and stuff?
I didn't know there was a remote.
And if you have a laptop, you can hook it up over here.
Yeah, I have a laptop. Yeah, exactly.
So he said he was going to start the recording, and there's a remote there, and he laptop. There's a little thing with instructions in case you need to zoom in or
got it.
move the camera.
Got it. Yeah, okay, cool. Excellent.
And I guess you're going to have us in front here? Or?
Yeah, I think so. If you're cool with that.
Yeah.
Is this going to be in your face though?
Is that going to be on throughout, or is it?
Well, I was probably going to try to put like the flyer up here.
Oh.
But we can see what it looks like.
Okay. Do you need to sit here, or?
No, you guys sit there. Maybe I'll sit here on the side.
I'm slower too.
Oh.
Jay.
Well.
Usually these events get packed like later on.
Hello.
Oh, hey, Sam. Hey, Sam, Sean Kennedy.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. This is Marina.
We know each other,
Yes.
I figured as much, yes, but I wanted to just make sure to do the proper induction anyway.
It is cold in here today.
Yeah, I'm sniffling, so I have to.
These would be a little tight. No, that should have to work.
Great.
Alright. You want us,
Yeah, I think if you guys can sit here,
okay.
like, there's 5 of you all, so
Okay.
that would be great.
Sure. I connected with somebody Take Back the Bronx. I think it was Howard. I think it was Howard. Yeah.
She's like our front person.
Kind of like a weird outside of the university room.
Is that Susanna there? No, I'm asking.
It's not romance.
It's not.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. She's the other person on that panel.
That you know.
Yeah.
You're folks in the East Hall?
Yeah, East Hall.
Okay, yeah.
Julian.
Engaged citizen.
I know, right?
This off New Yorker.
Yes, I haven't been here long, I've been here almost 2 years since I started. It's just so different everywhere else.
Hey, go there. Because I was briefly in Philly for a bit. I know Philly is kind of it's picking up the same type of vibe.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
But
It's not a very interesting topic.
gotcha. I think Philly's different on a lot of and I know that losing a license today, so
How are you?
just like in favor.
Good. Was in court today at the rezoning.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was, how'd it go?
Not well. I'm not optimistic. The city, they had like 5 attorneys, because it's Bedford Park and East Harlem now.
Right.
Oh, they tell people downstairs?
So Legal Aid is arguing that the city didn't follow the state's environmental CEQA, right, rules. And their argument is that those are not rules, those are guidelines. And that if you open up this can of worms, why haven't you done this for the other, projects that have been done in the past? Why are you doing this now? Why did you wait until it's, was passed to do this?
Yeah.
Those are guidelines, those are not rules. And if you try to make it so, you're gonna open up a can of worms. And the judge who had decided on something in Brooklyn Heights, I don't know exactly what it was, she was not impressed with Legal Aid's response to that. And so where we left it is that Legal Aid and the other attorneys are going to submit arguments that she's going to consider and come to a decision. There won't be a hearing per se, but
I do have flyers, yes.
it doesn't
Thank
sound
you so much. What's
optimistic.
your name again?
Jay.
Jay.
I don't remember who the
Me
judge
too.
is.
Because they actually told me it was downstairs.
Kat Myers and Jennifer Levy.
They told you where?
So then it'll be up to them to,
They want me to Alabama.
Yeah, totally wrong, obviously. but
it'll be
there's
up
a
to them
bunch that you can
to appeal if the
have.
Legal Aid wants to pursue, and,
You can take
what else?
these. Here, I'll show you. You can get these.
I don't know, I'm not gonna focus on that today, but I am gonna talk about it later.
Hi. Hello. So nice to see you.
Hi.
How are you? Yeah.
Nice
to see you. Oh yeah? Oh, you have the week off. Oh, okay. Yeah. You're like, yes, I've been waiting for it. I know exactly what I'm doing. That's awesome. Cool. I'm pretty good, moving things forward. Keeping it moving. It's definitely nice. Yeah, it's like not as much fun to implement as I could it is to organize. To win something. Yeah, because it's just not. Yeah, but I don't. It's good to do.
It's a good problem.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. Yeah, it's all.
I was really excited when I saw their
Juice.
that you were going to be one of the panelists.
Okay, I read that book.
Because you've been
Which
working
one?
for a long time.
Carbon Castles.
Oh, yeah.
And I read the Tenant Movement book. And I met with Mark Mason.
How was that?
He's really funny. Do you know him?
I've seen his talk.
I ran for the district people.
He was.
No, I'm doing hip hop.
No. It was great. It was like a game show that Dave Chappelle hosted called I Know Black People. And it was like him and in Washington Heights.
I have never heard about this.
Yeah.
Oh my god. I
I'm
love
one of the
it.
white writers on the show. So,
Wow. He's a character. He definitely did not even write that question. He was very funny about it. He was just like, that's an intro. I haven't heard it before. Like, yeah. He was just like, whoa. What's up? But like, why not Afghans run down delis? Kentucky Fried Chicken. And then I was like,
that might be a good question someone was organizing.
and then I was like, I don't know. He just kind of talked about how we're all like, in Europe, so you guys are working and skills and so kind of thing. It's kind of like we mostly just ended up talking about doing just like tenant movement history.
Were they just there, like in the corner there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're right to council because we went from and there's no like every organization does their onboarding differently. There's like if you said you want to produce like the Right to Council Coalition curriculum for different instead of being grounded in mainstream theory plus mainstream rights to council. And it was like something alternative. And then of course the little project together, and then also all of it is just like, so then I was like, oh yeah, totally, we should do that. I was like, oh, who has it? Does somebody have this? And
So I used to teach this stuff on.
it actually would be really good to have something. So,
Right. And when I started attending, they had their own materials. But
Thank you for your help, I appreciate it.
yes.
Yeah. He's really good with that. He's amazing.
And if I go online and you can change it and add to it.
Fresh Draft is trying to move. I don't know
So that's the
where
idea.
that is at.
I met Susanna about what tenants
When they first started moving there, I did a project with my kids on environmental.
It doesn't really, there isn't anything on
Like,
that.
and he like walked them around the neighborhood. And he was,
They they're gonna cost security.
what?
Have chairs out there.
yeah.
But like these chairs?
Yeah, you're not supposed to have them due to like some bias.
Well, this isn't your responsibility.
Do you have this like map?
Hi,
Hey.
board, Jay.
Susanna.
Susanna Blankley, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Anyway, so I just ended up talking to him more about like the communist organizing in the 50s. Yeah. And he was very like lively. But he told me great advice. Yeah, he was telling me about the
Rafael?
Gordon folks.
Yeah.
Actually, need to email him about something.
Thank you.
It was about women labor movement, but it had footage from rent strikes in the 30s in Chicago. It was amazing. Yeah, anyway. Yeah, so that's, he was very helpful with that question. But I have been working on it and like trying to answer those questions.
And the history is important.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it was taught to me, like, have rules about who was allowed.
Hi, Marina Chaumtoli. We're like Facebook friends now. We're like
Yeah, so
real friends.
it was to get them out of either usually
That's all right. No worries.
Hi, I'm Sean
Sean,
Kennedy.
hey,
Nice to meet you. Of
Yeah.
course. Thanks for all
this.
your contributions and enthusiasm and everything.
Yeah, I mean, like,
So
let's
appreciate
see,
it.
anything related to neighbors, basically.
Yes,
When do I show up?
Exactly.
So,
They're like the first Christian people were the Adjunctionists. Like they were like
so just
Oh,
your
this is not
like
New York, this is
intersect
New
on
York. Oh, Europe.
PSC,
Yeah.
like, because they've been doing all this adjunct organizing.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah,
you'll
they've
see
started
if you ever,
to
like,
do
go to
all of
documents,
this adjunct
but, like, you'll see
organizing
them, like,
because
okay,
there's now
like, what was going on in Russia?
commitment, at
Like,
least rhetorically,
what- do you know what I mean?
to
I don't know. Like, I feel like you have to cure
you
that.
know, the 7K for adjuncts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I feel like
yeah,
I'm working
hang
on
on,
it.
let me
and it's
just give
really
you
not
one
as complicated as
second.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's just like you have to create space to ask the right people. So, no, thank you. More power to you and much respect, but no, thank you.
Hey,
How are you? Hi, I'm Susanna.
Hi, Marina.
Hey, Marina. Okay. Good. Hey. Hey. Good to see you. Nice to see you. How are you doing? Good. Yeah, good. I'm good. What's going on? Oh, you know, I'm just in that light. Oh. Maybe I'll come to you.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Hey, Sean, awesome. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my
I really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Totally.
Yeah.
My pleasure, yeah.
Thanks for having me.
I was like, I can't really say no to Chaumtoli.
That was like a perfect signature. I love it.
Oh.
Yeah, I was like,
Awesome. Cool. All right.
yeah, what did you talk about your advice, like, how to counsel? I mean, there's like so much, you're like more deeper in this work.
I don't have that. Yeah, I'm like, those were very good questions. I
know.
I was like, should we
get the answers?
Yeah. I was like,
What should we do?
who's talking about what, actually? I have no idea.
Should we huddle maybe?
Yeah, if you guys want to huddle,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
sure.
Yeah, totally. Ah, Julian.
Hi.
Perfect.
Sean.
Hi.
Nice to meet
Nice
you.
Do you know Sam?
Yeah.
I don't think so, yeah. Sam, nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks for
Joining us. Yeah. So if you want to maybe grab a chair, yeah.
Do you want to, should we go to a corner to get away from the light or
Yes.
something?
Yeah, I'll come to you.
Okay.
So I'll look at This is Julian, by the way. Susanna. Marina.
Hello.
Hi.
Sam.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Chaumtoli.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
I'll let you guys huddle, but just so you know, this is totally informal. You know
Okay.
what I mean? So
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna make like it's gonna be like read like the questions. Just like identify you according to what's on the publicity material. And then you guys can feel free to do whatever you want.
Will you draw straws as you do?
I mean, I'm mostly.
Oh, no, that's what I'm at.
Oh, yeah. How. How that's connected, city law, that it actually does talk about discrimination and social income. So I'm figuring out the law, because law professional like this one, because if you have, he seems to know most everybody and you're unsuitable for tenancy, so that's, but, so that's the, and that's kind of like the gist. I'm just gonna touch up on like, just this notion of working class culture is also diminishing. But I know that you both are like really much more deeper in like gentrification and displacement. So I was like waiting over there.
Well, didn't Oscar's groups nice to
I'm not
ban on
more
benefits or?
For jobs. No, credit check law is linked to jobs.
No, not
Yeah, non-housing.
housing.
So we dealt with that a lot, and I was
For me, it's just
in services, and I was the advocate
So
who tried to get opportunity to go back. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
that's what we saw. But I'm not here representing the organization. I just like to react to what's going on here. And we build houses. So I'm going to talk about more about sort of like these collateral impacts. And so what exists, what is it where we could be like filling the gap. So it's going to be sort of very New York law, but like homes and labor. Because I know that you guys are going to know about.
Including some of the against each other.
Just from the community.
I guess I just want like.
Because I used to work for.
I'm not going to the second. Really.
I'm not gonna make this place 7 degrees warmer in here.
Okay. I'm not gonna complain that I'm a teacher today. So like, I was walking outside, I was like, it's Drizzly, I don't care.
Maybe we should just start with
And I know him. I've worked with him for 5 years. But also this room does have a capacity of 40, but I had requested 30 chairs. And now he's trying to be annoying about it
But I just wasn't
because
sure this audience
it
felt.
has a capacity of 40 chairs. So we have 30 chairs set
So I
up.
was just trying to.
So whatever, it'll be fine.
Sort of saying that, we can take this conversation. Starting point.
Yeah, I mean,
That way.
But we have the table.
yeah. Say that again.
We have the tables talking about the history of kind of organizing in New York. And some of the connections between like the tenant movement and the live stream.
It does have a live stream, yeah.
Yeah.
If you check either CUNY Adjuncts on Twitter or CUNY Adjunct Project on Facebook.
And then like how the idea that we accept wages as like an.
It's not on the event page itself, but I can add it
Like we're organizing within the idea.
in a minute.
You know, like where that, like those ideas come from and some of the limitations. Yeah.
And you don't need a login, you can just click on the link.
You just click on the link.
The thing was, talk a little bit about like the labor that goes into building communities that are on campus displays, but then mostly focus on why so many people support real estate in New York and bank exchanges that are good for them. So trying to unlock those contractions while also acknowledging things that modify them. All of these things. So in order.
Alphabetical, let's see.
It's good to be H in the middle, you know it's gonna be. That, oh, you were asking, you suggested a proposal?
I think we can do reverse.
You just volunteered?
Yeah, I'll take the reverse.
Reverse alphabetical.
My last name.
Okay, it's on the event page now. Yeah. Thank you for that. I usually don't post it on the screen until like the day, so that more people can show up.
So that's,
do it.
whatever, as long as everyone knows.
I would love for them to do introductions and maybe ask them questions. I don't know who's in the room at all.
You want? Yeah, we can also do that as well. Yeah, I think we should do that because it's fairly intimate. So.
Yeah, and I just don't know folks.
Do you want to announce this at all?
Thank you. Yeah, I have. I will announce that. Yeah. How do you pronounce your last name? Huq. It is Huq.
Yeah, it's Huq, yeah, I know, it's not.
How are people feeling? Should we get, oh my god, of course. I'm the person, right? I'm the co-organizer and moderator, my phone's going off. Let me put those.
wondering if Rob would come. I think he's back.
From Brazil?
Yeah. I think he's back.
Well, just one announcement before we get started. Even though this room has a capacity of 40 seats, I had only requested 30 to be set up. We have, obviously, space to put 10 more chairs, but one of the hardworking facilities people on duty tonight is being a little severe about setting up the other chairs. So it would be great for the moment if the remaining chairs that are available around the table can be taken. There's one there, one here, one there, one there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think they just didn't want to put them out yet. They wanted to first use the empty chairs. I guess there's a rule about...
Yeah, Susanna's exactly right. So let's just take all the chairs that are available. You guys can stay where you are. And if more people join us, we will put out more chairs and we'll just see what happens. Because it is...
We can say, talk about displacement also.
Exactly. I mean, it is the graduate center, right? I mean, it's a highly...
simulation, I say. You're like, we have space for 40, but we're only gonna have 30 chairs.
So I think, why don't we get started? First of all, I should tell you, my name is Sean Kennedy. I'm one of the co-coordinators of the CUNY Adjunct project, which has been based at the Graduate Center in this building and its prior building closer to Bryant Park for 22 or 23 years now. Some of you already know this. Some of you don't know this, but we were originally formed to advocate for and try to mobilize and represent the issues of adjunct instructors and contingent faculty at CUNY. Because our professional staff Congress historically has not done an incredible job at doing that. They've come a long way since we were founded in 1994. But there's still some questions. And so one of the things that we think about in our work as the CUNY Adjunct Project, and I should add that we're an affiliate of the Doctoral and Graduate Students Council here at the Graduate Center, who give us the budget every year and pay us salaries, which is great to have resources, is that we've been trying to figure out where we are in the midst of all the different organizing around adjunct issues, around academic labor issues altogether, around movement, social justice organizing. And we started this sort of burgeoning initiative a couple years ago around the heading toward a just contract, so that we could hold space and invite conversation around the types of issues that don't necessarily always get addressed by our unions in whatever industry, right? Whether it's the academia, the academic industrial complex, or other industries. And so we've been having a number of events over the past little while under that heading, and this is sort of our biggest one to date. And we were really interested to talk about it because, of course, housing is an enormous problem for so many people, as is labor, right? And sort of having a chance to sort of think about them together, we thought would be quite provocative. So I can say a little bit more, but I thought maybe what we could do is my co-coordinators could introduce themselves, and then maybe we can go around the room and everybody could just introduce themselves briefly. That would be great, and then we can bring it back to our fabulous panelists who'll start us off. Does that sound good? Sure. Okay, cool. Do you want to go first, Lynn?
I'm Lynn Turner. I am I'm in sociology. I also teach as an adjunct, also once did labor organizing, and very excited about this panel because it's like such a great range of speakers, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Adjunct Project.
My name is Rafael Mutis. I'm one of the coordinators also. I focus on external to the DC organizing, so across the CUNY campuses, organizing and made great strides bunch of different groups across CUNY in the last couple of years to really start putting pressure on both the union leadership and the CUNY administration. I really appreciate this event because I had to fight my landlord on bullshit charges for 4 years. I live in a barrio which is facing terrible housing issues right now, particularly with the rezoning plan that's just got approved. So I'm very excited to get my buddy Sam and on the panel. So I mean, we're both also interested in environmental sciences and geography.
My name is Sheehan Moore, and I'm the final co-coordinator of the Adjunct project. I'm an anthropology student here at the Grad Center. Also just say that one of the projects we're working on right now is around equal funding for everyone in the Graduate Center. So if you're a student here and are concerned about the uneven distribution of fellowship and work conditions, even if you have like the full time funding package, you can get in touch with us, either like say something afterwards or message us on Facebook or email us.
If I could just jump in and say one more thing, we actually are live streaming, and we're going to have a recording of it as well, which we can distribute afterwards. And the information for the live stream is on our Facebook page, on the event page, and also on our Twitter account, but it's also videostreaming.gc.cuny.edu. Thanks to Marina for the help with making sure I now stop. So yeah, then maybe we can go around the room.
Sure. Hi, I'm not a student. So I lived in the city for a while. I do different kinds of organizing and mutual aid projects. I live in East Harlem, and I'm really disappointed to see what's happening there. And I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to organize around that. I'm interested in hearing from some of the existing groups that are working on projects like that. So I'm here.
Hi, I'm Andy Ramos. I'm a second-year student in anthropology. I'm interested in gentrification in Puerto Rico. But I'm also organizing social alternative in Harlem. We're organizing, trying to shifting towards Upper Manhattan, issues of zoning in Inwood, as well as Washington Heights. But also, I think we're going to try to put a little bit on our agenda what's happening. So I'm just organizing too far. Here to learn more.
My name is Josh Barnett. I actually work for the New York City Housing Authority. So I'm also shop student local 375, DC 37, and I chair the DC 37 Niger Coalition. We've been trying to get public housing workers and residents together to fight the fact that it's all being up for sale. So it's really glad to see this event.
I'm JT. I'm with an organization called United Neighborhood Houses that organizes settlement houses and other nonprofit community-based organizations in New York City. And I started Monday, and I'm running a new campaign area for United Neighborhood Houses, which is called Neighborhood Affordability. So looking at just this, how labor issues are connected to housing issues, and how we can make communities that are affordable and not just apartments.
My name is Josefina. I'm a graduate student in urban planning at Hunter. A lot of my focus is on housing, so
Hi, I'm Karina. I organize with Queens Neighborhoods United in Jackson Heights and Corona. And I also study urban social policy and housing inequalities.
Hey, Jay, born and raised on the Lower East Side, done organizing work in Chinatown, Lower East Side, pushed out, moved to Queens, got connected with the anti-gentrification project, and also working alongside Queens Neighborhood United as a volunteer organizer.
Hello, my name is Lakeisha Sparrow, urban studies graduate student at Fordham University, and my focus is on East Harlem and the rezoning proposal plan that's been approved and gentrification, displacement, and kind of housing and all that.
Hi, my name is Sakina Simimalo. I'm a student in the urban program that I work in the
Chris, I'm her husband. She's being humble, she's here with me. Yeah, I'm a recent graduate of the BA program in urban studies and journalism. I had very little desire to organize, but somehow it just always happens. I tried to organize my entire block with Sakina, 129th Street about 10 years ago. I also tried to organize my workplace. I was working at a music club, and by trying to unionize the place. So that's so I have tried to organize it both my job and so. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Casey. I'm a second year PhD student in sociology, studying housing inequality. I'm also a digital publics fellow at the Center for Humanities and working on a project called Housing Literacy, just trying to create a website that centralizes and highlights some of the resources around rent regulation in the city. One of the things I'm creating is an annotated lease. So I've been working with Sam a little bit on that and tenants and neighbors. So this is kind of a great place to be today.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I live in East Harlem, and I work with the Justice Center in El Barrio, a little bit with Marina, and we were fighting and organizing against the rezoning bill. We're going to continue to fight and organize against it, and so I'm really excited to be here to listen and learn.
My name is Samaris. Good evening, everybody. I'm not here with any particular organization, but I'm from the South Bronx, and now I'm living in the Northwest Bronx. And I was personally really disappointed that the Jerome Avenue rezoning passed. So I'm just trying to kind of like, grapple with that and understand what that means and just get resources so I can educate myself and my community on how to organize on similar issues in the future, and specifically learning more about the way that housing and labor issues intersect.
I'm Priscilla Bustamante. I'm a fourth-year student in the Critical Social Psychology program. My research is mainly on dehumanization within prohibition of policing. I'm really interested in thinking about how that connects to gentrification and consequences of labor and housing more broadly. And also to think about how academia and organizing can sort of work in tandem and how research can be useful on the ground.
Hey everyone, I'm Marika Diaz. I am a legal services lawyer and I work at Legal Services NYC doing a project that is a tenant rights project that focuses on the different neighbourhoods that are slated for rezoning and kind of doing anti-displacement work there.
Did you guys want to go?
Back there. Okay.
Oh, I thought maybe we'd let them settle in first, so maybe we can go that way, and then we'll jump that way. Yeah.
Oh, just introduce?
Yeah.
So Chaumtoli Huq, and I'm actually currently an adjunct at BMCC. And my work has been primarily around immigrant labor, and for many years I was a legal services lawyer, so we did everything that poor people experience, which is lack of housing, consumer debt, employment issues, because all of them sort of really kind of entangled together, and also immigration work. But
hi, I'm Marina Ortiz from East Harlem Preservation, also East Harlem and Barrio Community Land Trust, and VirtualBoricua.
Hey, I'm Julian Brave I'm a writer and policy analyst. I currently work at 350, but I used to work on housing issues at HPD. And yeah, pass it to you.
I'm Susanna. I'm glad to be here. I have worked on union. I've been a union organizer and a tenant organizer, so I'll try to speak from both of those experiences. And I was at CASA for a while. And was heavily involved in the Jerome Avenue rezoning fight. And I now work coordinating a citywide eviction defense network called the Right to Counsel Coalition.
Hi, I'm Sam Stein. I'm a student here, third year in the geography program. I was also a union organizer and researcher, and then an urban planning student, and then a tenant organizer, and then an adjunct, and now I'm here to put all this stuff together.
I'm Brian, bike messenger from Philadelphia, interested in labor movements and housing movements and hearing about solidarity between the two and many types of interaction.
Hi everyone, my name is Crystal Vizcaino. I'm a tenant organizer at UHAB. I organize in East Harlem and Inwood. So Marika said earlier, we're collaborating in the same project for tenants' rights.
My name is Elizabeth Capel. I write about housing in New York City, and I've also started to work with DSA on their housing project with research.
Hi everyone, my name is Anja Zadel. I am a PhD student at the New School in Public and Urban Policy program. I'm studying community participation in Nigeria, in Africa, and in New York City, in South Bronx, and in East Harlem. And I live in Jerome Avenue, Highbridge.
Great. Then if you all would like to start introducing yourselves, just briefly.
Raj Nair, actually a community board member in Community Board 6. I sit on the housing committee, and these type of issues about affordable housing have been something that we've been doing for the last several years. So I'm definitely open to learning more things and things I can bring back to the community.
I'm Philip Popovich. I'm an architect. I'm interested mostly in like shared living and community organizing, ways that people can like solve their housing issues by themselves, kind of like co-ops.
Hi, I'm Pooja Patel. I'm a housing lawyer at Campbell Legal Services in Brooklyn. I'm also a tenant. I live in Flatbush, and in my free time I work with Equality for Flatbush.
Hi, my name is Sarah Cohen. I'm a senior attorney at Campbell Legal Services Housing Unit, and I work with Guy and the investment low income tenants in Brooklyn in the housing center.
I'm Tom Angati. Aside from being one of the editors of Zoned Out, Race Displacement and City Planning in New York City, I'm an emeritus professor here at Earth and Environmental Science and Hunter College Urban Planning.
Hi, my name is Bolanda. I'm a community organizer and I work on housing for New York City.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. It's such a wonderful group of people from all different sort of contexts. I think maybe we'll just turn it over to you all. And I should also just acknowledge the fact, right, that we're on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people here in what's now called New York City. Sort of the way we thought about structuring this is the 5 people here who will be speaking will go for maybe 10 to 12 minutes each. And then we can open it up into questions and really, hopefully, a general discussion, right, that we can maybe all think together, you know, for the second portion of the event. And then we're also going to have an informal reception downstairs on the 5th floor. You're all welcome to join us for that once this portion of the evening wraps up. Any questions, concerns, issues? Okay. And you guys have worked out who's going when?
Yeah. We landed on reverse alphabetical by last name. So.
Fantastic.
Very strategic.
And I'll just give you a little heads up, and you got like maybe 2 minutes left.
Right, and I don't I guess so, yeah. Thank you. All right, can you all hear me? Okay. So we're all going to talk a little bit about what we know, but we also, in our huddle, said that we wanted to also acknowledge that like there's a lot of other topics that are probably going to come up that we'll have other reflections on, so we're just going to sort of introduce some stuff and then open it up. So I was looking at the questions that came with this event, which are up on that board. Maybe I'll just read them to get us oriented. How are labor issues connected to housing issues? How does labor exploitation ramify in housing exploitation and vice versa? How can we think of struggles for housing variously considered as labor issues, and why should we consider them as such? What can labor movements learn from housing movements, and how can we think of these movements together? I want to start with the second to last question, which is, how can we think of struggles for housing variously concerned as labor issues? Why should we consider them as such? That question got me, first, my memory went to something that a former teacher and mentor of mine used to say, Peter Kwong, who taught urban planning and sociology here and at Hunter College. He taught a class about gentrification using Chinatown as his case study, and I don't know if it was the first class or the second, early on, he just posed this very simple question of why does this matter? Like, okay, gentrification is bad for some people, good for other people. Why does it matter? And we all tried to guess what he was thinking until finally he said, gentrification is about theft of collective labor. The collective labor of working class people in communities who have for years, often generations, put their own labor into building up their neighborhoods. Whether that was the sweat equity into their buildings, the hard work of building community institutions, fighting the city for resources or supplying them when the city wasn't providing them. And then what gentrification comes in and does is usurp all that labor, all the value produced by that labor. And there's a geographer who writes about a similar process happening in India named Apsita Chatterjee, who writes about this as an exact corollary to the alienation of workers from their labor. This is the alienation of workers from their space. They put in the work that creates the value for the land and then are alienated from it by capital through gentrification. So I think in a very direct and material way, the housing struggles that we're talking about in New York, which are often gentrification struggles at this historical period, are also directly labor struggles because they're about the theft of common labor. So that brings us to the moment that we're living in, a moment of hyperinvestment in urban real estate. And that's what's happening in New York City, that's what's happening in Mumbai, that's what's happening in San Francisco, that's what's happening in a lot of cities around the world. It is not what's happening in every city. It's always joined by disinvestment from someplace else. And often that happens combined in the same city, often that happens combined in the same block. Sometimes that happens combined in the same building. We have hyperinvestment in one apartment and disinvestment from another. But the way that capital is pursuing accumulation right now has a lot to do with urban real estate. It's often a last gasp effort when all else fails. When other modes of production are not producing profit at good rates, capital looks for other safer long-term strategies. Sometimes that's municipal bonds, sometimes it's different things. Right now it seems to be land, and specifically urban land. At the same time, this is still an industrial world and an industrial society, but our cities, especially in the US, are not where the industry is happening anymore for the most part. There's all sorts of industry still happening in cities, but it's not where the big industrial production is happening. Big industrial production is happening outside of cities. So what does that mean? It means that the most powerful block is real estate. It used to be that real estate and industrial capital basically fought out for what they wanted, and the rest of us in the working class fought both of them in different ways. Industrial capital is not a major player in most American cities, certainly not a major player in New York right now, which leaves real estate dominant. Which means that when urban planners are thinking about who they have to please, they're looking mostly at real estate interests. And then they're balancing that with the people who live in those assets. But real estate is the most powerful player. So then if we think about where people are working, more and more of it has to do with real estate. Some of that is in construction, some of that is in property service, some of that is in government service, but government is captured by the real estate industry. So labor is very closely tied to the growth of real estate capital at this point in time, at least as I see it. And I've written about this elsewhere in a book that's going to come out in November. This is essentially a real estate state. In the same way that we have had a warfare state and continue to have a warfare state, we have had a welfare state and don't really. We're living in a real estate state where the government is oriented towards the needs of real estate, which sucks for us tenants, and it does weird things to the labor movement. And that's what I'm going to talk about. I used to be a researcher first at SEIU 32BJ, which is New York and the entire East Coast Property Services Union. Property service meaning any kind of work on a building that's not engineering. So janitors, doormen, security guards, window washers, all that. Later on, I worked as a researcher for the Laborers International, so construction work. Both of those unions are thinking very much about what the real estate industry is doing and are trying to get on the right side of those developments. In an earlier period, if we look at the 1960s and 70s, which is when gentrification starts to be a recognizable phenomenon in New York City, labor was kind of seen as the enemy of the gentrifier. A guy named Suleiman Osman wrote a great book called The Invention of Brownstone Brooklyn. And he writes about this when the Brownstoners were these kind of like upper middle class, quasi avant-garde people who thought living in black neighborhoods would be cool. they wanted to preserve old buildings and, of course, live in them and make them profitable. They saw labor which was engaged in large-scale clearance and redevelopment projects as the enemy. Often those redevelopment projects included public housing and even more at that point, Michelama and other sorts of subsidized housing. So at that moment, the gentrifiers were anti-labor, and the laborers were not just working-class people, but also, at least some of the time, building working-class housing. That dynamic has largely flipped. What's interesting, though, is the building trades workers, the construction workers, often in the public imaginary, get tagged as the hard hats, they're pro-development, they don't care about anybody but themselves. The fact is, the only big unions that are out there fighting these rezonings right now are the building trades. It is the complete opposite of the public impression. That doesn't mean that every construction union is on this program, but it is more the case than it has been in the past. The reason for that is largely that the trades have been so shut out of the construction industry in New York City, including their stock and trade of high-end Manhattan real estate, that they are taking a much more aggressive position to both city government and REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York, which is the industry association for developers. So they're actually opposing some of the rezonings and making more lasting partnerships with community groups than they have in the past. The public sector unions have largely been absent from the anti-gentrification struggle in New York City, even though they are often considered to be the more progressive and active unions. 1199 is essentially nowhere to be found and has not fought back when hospitals have been converted into luxury condos. DC 37 supported the mayor's affordable housing plan, which is not an affordable housing plan, it's a real estate plan. They are not particularly active, but on the whole, lining up on the wrong side. The ones that are very active and on the wrong side are these service sector unions, which are, again, generally perceived to be the most progressive of all American and New York City unions. And there's reason for that. They do things like sponsor the Fight for 15, and sometimes taxi workers unions get sponsorship from SEIU, and they were there at Occupy Wall Street, and they've done a lot of high-profile things for the left, and some people have said that they're essentially the bankroll for the left right now. There are lines that they will not cross, however. And the two most powerful unions on this front are SEIU 32BJ, where I worked for 4 years, and the Hotel Trades Council. They have slightly different lines on development, gentrification, and real estate. The Hotel Trades Council has a very specific goal in mind, which is to regulate their industry. The government isn't regulating it, the companies aren't regulating it, it has become the union's job to be the regulator. So what they do is try to fight the expansion of hotels that are unlikely to be union and try to incentivize hotels that will be union. That second one is very unlikely. So most of what they do is try to make sure new hotels are not built. That sometimes aligns with anti-gentrification movements. Tenants generally don't like hotels popping up in their neighborhoods either. But what it often means is supporting rezonings that are bad for tenants as a whole. We're talking about upzonings that bring in luxury development, with this little caveat that says there will be no new hotels allowed unless given a special permit, and that special permit is seen as a referendum from the union. So if the union says yes, they get the special permit. If the union says no, they don't. They have put together an extremely elaborate research and political department that monitors every single land use operation in New York City. They know months before it goes public that it's going to happen, and they are there. They bring their members. Their members are on message testifying that this is about good jobs and affordable housing. But what it's about is regulating their industry. 32BJ has in their contract since 2011 a commitment that they will support any rezoning that's initiated by a developer in the Real Estate Board of New York, REBNY. That is in their contract. That came in 2011, which was the first contract they negotiated after the mortgage crisis. And that was their way of saying, we need this real estate industry back and healthy, and we're going to do what we can to support it. If you look in the more recent contract, that language has been broadened a bit to say that 32BJ and the Real Estate Board of New York both acknowledge that a healthy real estate industry is good for the city, and they will lobby together for mutually beneficial projects. So at this moment, one of the biggest, most powerful, generally most politically progressive unions in New York City will support any rezoning requested by a major developer. They also have lined up in support of the mayor's rezoning agenda. They were not only an endorser of the general plan, which was common among many nonprofits as well as labor unions, but they have supported the individual rezonings in neighborhoods, which has been more rare. The other day, I was at a very, in some ways, obscure community board meeting in Queens, where a community organization brought out like 150 members to testify against a rezoning that would bring in unaffordable housing and a Target store. Everyone was against it. This was not a big citywide fight. So every single person who testified against it, everyone who testified against it, with one exception, which was a 32BJ member who got up and said that Sun Equities, the real estate investment trust behind this, has contacted them about the jobs, and so they support the rezoning. So they are also monitoring every single zoning change. So this is the state we're in. There's a lot that we can do about it. It's not a fait accompli, but we are at a moment when the truth is that gentrification and housing are labor issues, and yet our institutions of organized labor are mostly either not doing much about it or lined up on the wrong side. Thanks.
Ortiz? Yeah. Usually I like my last name, so I get to go last. But so again, I'm Marina Ortiz from East Harlem Preservation. And anyone who mentioned that you live or do work in East Harlem or Upper Manhattan or are fighting in any way, shape, or form the rezoning, please be sure to reach out to me either today or eastharlempreservation.org. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Really want to work with you on everything that you're doing. So we in East Harlem, we were just rezoned, and it was 18-month process where the city created this fake community visioning plan that they said was came out of meetings with community stakeholders, and they said, so here, this is what East Harlem has decided it wants, which is not at all what we want. And Rafael, and I want to also acknowledge your work in the Bronx with the community gardens. Mention that. You mentioned before the Lenape people, and I always also, there in East Harlem there is a project called Sendero Verde, which is on 111th, going to be on 111th, one entire city block. Right now there are 6 community gardens that are going to be displaced, and a ball field that was built out of rubble because the city had abandoned that property for over 40 years. So we're going to lose all of that, and the developers have decided to honor the Lenape people in their design. And they made this presentation at the community board, which was like extremely offensive. And this is a country that was founded on the violent displacement of people of color, indigenous people here, people in Africa, and in East Harlem, it's a community also that was built by immigrants, Irish, Italian immigrants who built the railroads, the subways, and so we got the tenements in East Harlem to house poor and working people, and it's been a haven for immigrants and working people, low-income people, for over 100 years, and now predominantly Latino, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Dominican, African American, and so now the city, because it's Manhattan, wants to just basically push us out. The mayor's picked 14 communities of color, low-income communities of color throughout the city to rezone, and has protected wealthier white communities like Riverdale to preserve and downzone the West Village. He's not even, like with the jail situation in Rikers, he's not even going to contemplate anything in Staten Island, wealthier parts of Staten Island, except the North Shore. It was a crazy process where every time we asked questions at these meetings that were run by city reps and community stakeholders, executive directors, and staff of nonprofit organizations that rely on the city for millions of dollars in funding, so no one was about to cross the elected official who at that time happened to be the Speaker of the City of New York. So it was a lot of arm twisting and funding of local nonprofits to participate, to facilitate in this participatory process, right? So that meant that if you signed into a meeting, you were one of 1,800 people who were engaged, and your name, if you put your affiliation, your name was published, your organization was published in the final report, as if we supported this one. We didn't. So now when I go to any of these meetings, I'll sign in as Mickey Mouse or something like that, because no. So the plan that did come up, and then the speaker did the bad cop, good cop routine with the mayor, where she said, no, this is too high and too much. So let's bring it down a little. And so supposedly we got what we wanted. No. In fact, the plan that the mayor that went through is a plan that 38% of the people in East Harlem cannot afford to qualify for the affordable housing. The housing is only going to go as low as 30%, and for the most part 40, 60, and over 100% AMI, area medium income. So we cannot afford these apartments. We don't make enough to qualify for the affordable housing. 38% of East Harlem residents. And that's who's documented. So they're not counting people like our children who are sleeping on couches because their grown ass can't afford a minimum wage or whatever to move out and start their own families in their own neighborhood, right? So this plan is nothing. It provided nothing for people in East Harlem. Mentioned before about credit checks. So city says, oh, we're going to have a set aside for homeless people. And so, but what about credit checks, right? What if you have housing court records? I don't foresee that that's going to happen. And it's not a plan that does anything really to combat homelessness in New York City. Like Sam mentioned, homelessness, in fact, Picture the Homeless, we've also done work with them, just came out with a report called The Business of Homelessness. And so that is also very much part of the New York economy. So the city's homeless department is a multi-billion-dollar agency that is funded about twice as much as HPD and affordable housing initiatives, right? So it's ridiculous. So in East Harlem, we had a lot of fights with the Justice Center, Party for Socialism and Liberation. We went out in the community and engaged over 3,000 people in just 2 months, just talking to people on the street. And the majority of them didn't even know that this was happening and did not support it. And we took the petitions to City Hall, and we showed them very dramatically by unveiling them over the balcony. Maybe you heard about that. And we were promptly kicked out, of course. We were not allowed to sit in on the actual vote at City Council. They closed it off to the public. We shut down the community board meeting to force them to prevent the vote. And they voted no with conditions, which is ridiculous. We convinced the borough president to say no, but again with conditions. And through all of this, today there is a lawsuit that the Legal Aid Society that involves the Bedford Armory, which is another battle, but also East Harlem's rezoning has been attached to the lawsuit. And there was a hearing this morning where the attorney, one of the attorneys, there were like 5 attorneys for the city and Bedford developers, and the adjectives that they used to denounce the rezoning complaint were inflammatory, feeble, unlawful, astonishing, confounding, unnatural, irrational, capricious, impermissible, arithmetically transformative, mockery, tabula rasa. It was hilarious, and I'm so sorry I couldn't film it because I really love to do that kind of stuff. So it was a battle, and we're still having it. So we'll see what the judge decides if she's going to let us. And I'm not a plaintiff in the case, but I say us to let the plaintiffs proceed with the argument that the city ignored the state's CEQA environmental guidelines, right? Rules, and the argument on the other side was those are guidelines, those are not rules, okay? If you start opposing them, if you start calling them rules, that's just gonna open up a can of worms. Like what is the point then of having environmental guidelines from the state if the city, will not be asked to enforce them? It's just ridiculous. Just one ridiculous example of how things work. But going back to the community fight, so in terms of labor, we had, it was ironic, one 32BJ person who is the last standing tenant in a rent control apartment that is like the last remaining building on, the developer would love to knock down the building and just do a whole street length development, and he's a rent control tenant, and he would come out testifying over and over again, but he's also 32BJ, so he would do that thing about the jobs, and then the community organizations that he was a part of would tell him, well, don't talk about that part, about your tenancy, just whatever. Anyway, it got very political, and there are people who work in a group called Positive Workforce, which is a non-union labor, they basically lobby and fight for jobs on construction sites, but for the most part they're non-union, but they're also very politically connected to the elected officials, and they're funded by the elected officials, and they also serve as muscle. So if you ever go to a community board meeting and you see these big guys with hard hats and the neon jackets, that's because they're being asked to do that. And so they're all about cheerleading for jobs, jobs, jobs. But the reality is that, like Sam said, a lot of these construction jobs are not going to include them, Okay, so so what gets left is people fighting for a few jobs for porters and doormans, and no disrespect, but really that is not going to resolve, and these are jobs that people are not going to be able to afford in the kind of buildings that they're working in anyway, right? So we have alternatives. I'm part of the East Harlem El Barrio Community Land Trust, and so the city, after years of fighting, has agreed to turn over 4 buildings to the land trust. These are buildings in complete distress, really bad shape. The tenants are not doing well. They're not all not all of them have people there. But so we've been, negotiating, fighting, and so the city did agree to turn over 4 or 5 buildings, and there was a grant that was given also for $500,000 to go towards renovating these buildings. So that's wow, so something's happening, right? But then they turn around and give $25 million to the managers of La Marqueta, which is a site of a former public market, which really no longer exists. And there's been tens of millions of dollars thrown at them over the last 15, 20 years to, quote, revitalize a failed model, in effect, right? So $25 million versus $500,000. And the city's report back to the community recently, they mentioned that they're giving NYCHA $50 million. And it's like $50 million to NYCHA, and they're not saying whether that's from monies from selling off the parking lots and playgrounds and front lawns to private developers for market rate housing and NYCHA complexes. But so NYCHA's getting $50 million and La Marqueta's getting $25 million. You really have to go to La Marqueta to see and to try to figure out, help me figure out where $25 million is gonna go. I don't know. So I'm also Puerto Rican, so we did a lot of work after Maria to support people there and continue to do that. But we're seeing a lot of people coming from Puerto Rico, obviously, because they have been devastated. And we're seeing a lot of that kind of speculation as well. So the creepy crypto community has been having conferences in Puerto Rico. They want to set up Portopia, which is like this autonomous political and economic autonomous place. And so they're buying up all the property, and they're really not doing anything for anyone. They have really bad seedy connections in Hollywood. So we're fighting that, as well as trying to support people who are coming here because they're displaced, and encouraging people to go back, repatriate, and buy and help keep, and work towards making Puerto Rico an independent nation as it should be. So this is the work that we're involved in, and I really want to talk to anyone who's in East Harlem, Upper Manhattan, or fighting rezoning. So please reach out to me. Thank you.
Also, just a moderating note, there is a seat there and a seat there. People want to sit. You're also welcome to chill if that's okay for you. We can't really bring any more chairs in though. Just as a heads up. Okay, cool. Thank you for coming.
I think I'm next.
Do you want me to click slides for you?
Yeah, I'll do some sort of like cue.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Wait, Julian Brave Noisecat when sklext, when kikachedes questua Alexanderati, when kekachedes questua edarchi Noisecat, sequach mochen, statlimp ken, that's esken which stekwen. Latwan poopsman na eliotic tibiqua lenape uluch. Hello everyone, my name is Julian Brave Noisecat. My mother is Alexandra Roddy and my father is Ed Archie Noisecat. My people come from the Cannon Lake Reserve, the people of Broken Rock, that's Escanump in British Columbia, Canada. And it's an honor to be here today on Lenape traditional territory in New York City. I wanted to begin my presentation by telling you who I am and where I come from and where my people come from. Where we make our home, because I think home and the places that we come from matter. I also just want to begin because I realize I'm probably the youngest person sitting on this panel with giving a little bit of my background and why someone was foolish enough to invite me here. So I'm a student of colonial history. I had the opportunity to go to undergrad in this city, and went on to study some more in the UK. I learned a lot about colonialism there. And so I've had the privilege to learn quite a bit about the way in which my people were dispossessed and the ways in which those systems of oppression were perpetuated across North America and around the world. I also, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, was formerly an urban fellow in the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. I realize we didn't always do the best work, and I say that completely honestly. And I also had the opportunity to work on the community land trust project, so there were some decent things that we were able to do. But that's all to say that I think about housing issues quite often. I think of myself as a little bit of a wonk on these things. I like to read the white papers, to hear the latest issues, etc., and that really has informed my practice as a writer. So I also, in between my job at 350, where we work fighting climate change, I also do quite a bit of writing and thinking about issues related to housing. Today I'm going to tell a story about the longest running story of gentrification and displacement on this continent and in this nation. And that's the story of the gentrification and displacement of indigenous communities. I was reflecting on the questions that Sean sent, and I was thinking about this word housing. And I was thinking about that in relation to the ways in which I often find my people talking about where they come from, which is a slightly different conjugation of the same word, which is home. And just to begin my talk, I want to talk about, or I want us to sort of think about the slight difference there in the ways in which we articulate, housing, this thing that can be quantified into units and into AMIs and rates of affordability, and what home means to people, what it means to be from somewhere, to be rooted in a place. I also want to think a little bit about this thing called the housing crisis. There's this narrative that we often hear of, folks losing basically the American dream, right? Or working folks in cities getting pushed out because their rents become unaffordable. And I think that when we start to think about indigenous communities and other communities where there's an intergenerational story of displacement and dispossession, we have to start thinking about that crisis in a different scale and on a different time frame. This wasn't something that began in the dot-com boom or even after the 1970s. This is something that goes back over generations. With that in mind, I want to begin this story. So, the next slide. So I want to put us in a scene very quickly. This is 30th and International Boulevard in Oakland, California, in what's called the Fruitvale neighborhood. Fruitvale, for those who don't know, is kind of a microcosm of urban America over the last decade. Just a few blocks away from 30th International is Fruitvale Station, a name that will probably ring true for many of you about the story of Oscar Grant, who was executed by the BART police when I was in high school. It's also a predominantly Latinx community. So the language that you'll hear spoken on the streets of Fruitvale is predominantly Spanish. And lastly, as you can kind of see from the photo that I took here from my reporting trip, it's also a site of gentrification and the story of the housing struggle in the United States over the last few years. In December 2016, 36 folks died in a fire at what was called the Ghost Ship, which was an artist collective turned sort of ramshackle residence that was in some sense a byproduct of the process of gentrification and massive unaffordability that plagues the Bay Area today. In this microcosm of urban America, I'm going to talk a little bit about my friend, Joe Wakazu. He's the guy holding the coffee, looking at the memorial of the Ghost Ship. Joe is what we like to call an urban Indian. So in this microcosm of urban America, there's also actually a pretty deep history of Native communities that folks really don't know about. Joe and his friends who happen to be homeless hang out at 30th and International, and Native folks have been hanging out on that same block for decades. In the 1970s, there was a bar called the Red Vest that was founded by Native communities who were displaced through a federal program to the Bay Area, where they'd hang out and drink. And today there's a health center there called the Native American Health Center that's actually straight across the street from the Ghost Ship, where many urban Native folks go to get their health services. So right here in this microcosm of urban America, there's also an indigenous America that often goes unnoticed. Whenever I drive down the street here, go back home, I often see folks from our community roll down the window, stop, say hi, do the whole thing. This is also, this should go without saying for the folks in this room, but I just want to name it. This is also a a place that's transforming. This is a place that's caught in what I like to call a boxing match between the invisible hand of Silicon Valley and the defiant fist of Bay Area radicalism, between a fight between the Google campus and the ghost ship. Over the next couple decades, it's expected that 2.1 million people are going to move to the Bay Area. And as that process happens, many people like Joe, his loved ones, many members of our Native community are going to be displaced. And that is the hard political economic reality. Get to the next slide. So just a little background on the indigenous history of cities. I realize that this isn't something that we learn often. In 1952, there was a program called the Federal Indian Relocation Program that was established to send Native folks from reservations to cities with the promise of working class jobs. In 1953, one of the first urban Indian community centers was founded in Oakland. It's the Intertribal Friendship House. I used to go there a lot when I was growing up. Here's Joe hanging out in front of it. They have dance practice, drum and dance practice every Thursday night, and Joe's usually there, doing his moves. He's also a dancer. He's a cool dude. The Intertribal Friendship House played a really significant role in the occupation of Alcatraz, which was a landmark moment for indigenous rights in this country from 1969 to 1971. A group of urban Indians, Native students in colleges, allies, folks who were living on the same blocks as folks from the Chicano movement, from the Black Panther Party, from the student movements at the time, came together and started a movement that is sometimes referred to as the Red Power movement. The American Indian movement was tangentially involved, and it was really one of the first moments in 20th century U.S. history that Native folks arrived on the political scene. So in many ways, Oakland is an indigenous stronghold, although we often don't think about it that way. And Joe very much grew up in that world. His mom, Muriel, who passed away in 2005, was a matriarch in the urban Native community in Oakland. Folks just called her Grandma. I remember when we went to, when I'd go to Thursday night drum and dance practice, when I was too scared to dance, I'd go sit on her knee, and she was that figure in the community. So his family's very much at the center of a lot of this community. Hit the next slide. So in October of 2016, in the midst of this struggle over the future of the Bay Area and the ability of folks like Joe to live with a roof over their head and to live with dignity, Joe lost his home. He couldn't make his portion of rent in his Section 8 home, which was just $250, and he became one of the 5,629 people living under BART tracks, freeway overpasses, in open, empty lots in Alameda County, which is the county that Oakland is situated in. This was actually the first time that Joe had ever been homeless. He's 62 years old. He'd survived many moves from the res to the city to other reses back to the city, but this is the first time that he's actually sleeping out on the streets. And he, in order to survive, he hangs out with, there's a crew, as I mentioned, of homeless Native folks who hang out at 30th. It's kind of like the older homeless Native folks crew. They don't really want to hang out with the younger ones, because the younger ones are a little bit too crazy. But yeah, there's a crew of older homeless Native folks who hang out at 30th and International, and they look out for each other. There's a Wendy's right there. They usually sit there, and between hanging out, they go to their appointments at the Native American Health Center. We can hit the next one now. Oh man, 5 minutes. Okay. So 4 blocks down the way is Joe's daughter, Phyllis. And here's where things get a little bit complicated, because I lied a little bit when I said that the reason Joe's homeless is that he didn't make $250. I mean, he couldn't make the $250 in rent, but there's also a little bit of tension between Phyllis and Joe. things in the family aren't always so easy. Phyllis lost her job a few years ago. She recently had a son who's adorable. His name's Luciano, but Luciano's special needs and things haven't been great with Phyllis's baby daddy. And Joe wasn't really at the end of the day the best dad. I mean, nobody really wants to live with dad who was not really around all the time necessarily when they were growing up. And so part of the story here is not just that Joe didn't have a job and he couldn't make the $250 in rent, but that Phyllis at a certain extent had reached her wit's end and didn't want her dad who was sleeping on the couch to be there anymore. So he kind of got kicked out. We can do the next one. And there's more. Phyllis, as I mentioned, was living in Section 8 housing. She had the kind that's specifically attached to your unit, so it's not the kind where you can move around. She was getting herself by after she lost her job on a combination of SSI, TANF, food stamps, the sort of arithmetic of survival. Her Section 8 didn't actually adjust to her new non-employed existence. So she was paying, with $1,400 in sort of piecemeal together income, she was paying $685 in rent. Her rent was supposed to be 30%, so she was supposed to be paying about $450 when she had an income of about $1,400. So when we talk about housing, we often talk about things like, at least from the wonkish perspective, we often talk about systems like Section 8, et cetera, as being sort of the backstop for folks like Phyllis. But at the end of the day, the system didn't respond, and Section 8 actually turned into yet another opportunity for her to lose her home. And what do you do if you're Indigenous and you're faced with the loss of a home in Oakland, California? You think about moving back to the community that you come from. The Wakazu family, at least part of it, comes from the Torreon chapter of the Navajo Nation. The Torreon chapter of the Navajo Nation is situated on the eastern edge of the Navajo Nation, what's called the checkerboard area. It's called the checkerboard area because in the late 1800s there was a policy called the Dawes Act that helped privatize native land. And so this part of the Navajo Nation, unlike other parts, is a mishmash of private, tribally owned, federally owned, state-owned lands. It's Swiss cheese because the United States government was particularly good in this place at taking away indigenous-owned land.
So, just real quick, I understand that you're in the middle of something, but because the room is to capacity, what happens is you just have to stop the program for a little bit, and we're going to open up this wall here, because you see how people are lined up against the wall here, and it goes out of these seats here. We got to make more room so everybody can be able to sit, and so at the same time, it won't be a fire hazard. So we're going to open up this wall. Just give us a couple minutes so we can make the adjustment. So that the room, so that could be, more safe for everybody. I understand, but something we have to do. Okay.
I appreciate somebody know that I did ask to open up the room at 5:45.
You did?
I did ask to do that. I just want to make that note.
Let's just do it.
It's okay, just open it.
First call for 40 for setup for 30 people. Nothing at 40.
Don't leave, please don't leave.
He's gonna open it, so he's already offered.
This has never happened before.
That kind of thing.
I've never had this before. This is wild.
It would take you some time.
So, in case you're wondering online, we are in the middle of, we're like too big. We're just, this is really, really important issue. So we have a huge turnout. So they are going to open up the temporary walls so that we can let more people in sit comfortably. So that's what we're doing right now. Please stay tuned. We're not leaving. Yeah.
Great,
stay.
that's good. Smart.
And you know, of course, housing is a human right.
Keep going, Marina.
So let me just do some of my spoken word now. And again, it will be live streamed. So again, I want to encourage anyone online in the world, here in the room, to please come together and let's continue this work. East Harlem rezoning, it's not over. It's not over. We still have a whole bunch of things that we could do. We want to support your efforts. It was just incredible how many people came out from all over the city to support us in East Harlem. It was just amazing, so moving to see people from the Bronx, Chinatown, Queens come out to support us, because we understood that people understood that it was a crucial turning point in this city for the game that they're playing. So, you know, these kinds of forums are really important. And in East Harlem, we're not just continue to fight legally, we're going back to the streets, we're going to survey people with the Justice Center, and in the spirit of the Young Lords Party, we're going to ask them, what are the issues that they would like to see us take on, in addition to housing, of course, and continue to support that. And I know I'm like jumping in and taking over more time than I was allowed, but I just want to also point out that, you know, all of this has to do, as Sam said, and everyone else has said so far, about private property, right?
For 1 second. Sorry. The good news is that we have a lot of people. The bad news is that we do actually have to just take a 5-minute break so I get out of this room. Let's go. So that we can get into this room and let the workers do their job as easily as possible.
We're gonna move rooms?
Okay.
Well, they're gonna open it up. And but they need to get us out of this room right now because we actually are
Should we take our
arguably above capacity.
So what about the live stream?
Let me figure that out. But if a number of people can get out of the room first, that would be helpful.
Okay. Well, we're still live streaming though, right? So I'm going to keep talking. Hey, I will take any and every opportunity. You have to work it, okay? So I know that you're listening, de Blasio. I know you are. So these people are here from all over the city saying to you that what your plan, we know what your plan is really all about. We know that it's not about housing, it's about displacing people, just as this country has done for generations. And have you treated us like chess pieces from community to community, pushing people out to the suburbs, white flight, now y'all want to come back, and it's not, you know, I'm going to keep talking until, you know, we are still on the air, right? We're live streaming. Does anybody want to join me or have anything?
It was like we should be singing or something. I don't know. Yeah. While movement that like a song.
Yeah, by the way, we're going to add extra chairs here. But as long as a couple of people continue to move out, we'll be good.
Is this still the front of the room?
But that's still going to be the front of the room. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, we don't need to move.
Okay. Yeah.
Still the front of the room.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. So we are also launching what we're calling the People's Churches campaign, because we have at least 5 empty churches, built houses of worship that the Archdiocese and other institutions have been holding vacant and are in some cases likely going to sell off. And the People's Church, that was renamed as such by the Young Lords when they took it over, the First Spanish United Methodist Church, is up for landmarking. So we're also pushing that. And so we want to, in line with the People's Church, this First Spanish United Methodist Church that the Young Lords Party took over in the name of serving the community, we want to appeal to the Archdiocese and these other religious institutions to turn over these vacant properties to the community for cultural and other uses. These are beautiful buildings that should not be torn down or sold or turned into condos. So look for the People's Churches campaign in East Harlem, and we would like to see this become a citywide, campaign. Because we're not just talking about empty buildings, we're talking about empty lots, vacant lots, community gardens. People are being pushed out from community gardens. There is tons of real estate that is available, city-owned real estate that is not just HPD property, but EDC, Department of Education, Department of Sanitation. There is buku vacant real estate that they should turn over to community land trusts. Let us, we know how to make affordable housing really affordable.
This is a good stuff.
Give me one more second.
All right, so yeah. You told me when you want to jump back in.
When everyone's settled, yeah, then we can.
I need to put those chairs back.
They want us to stack the chairs back on.
The chairs that are by the wall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to take back our communities for however long we've been here. These are communities, as Sam and other people have said, that we've built, that we've labored for, we've raised our children. We were there when the city abandoned us.
Yeah, no.
We were there when they said we weren't worth it, and now they come and say, oh, well, this is like, funky. It's been like, you haven't done anything for generations. Yeah, and now you want it, right? No, we are not leaving. And we are building movements all over the city. This is happening in every single borough. We support and have supported folks in Chinatown, Lower East Side as part of the Citywide Alliance Against Displacement, protesting in front of Gracie Mansion and City Hall. We will continue to support seniors from Chinatown who held a 5-day hunger strike outside of the Department of Building in the dead of winter, freezing cold rain. These are seniors protesting the fact that the city kicked them out of their building, 85 Broad Bowery, to, quote, make repairs. So we support any and all people all over the city, all over this country, in Puerto Rico, all over the world, who are fighting this new economy. This concept of private property. This alien concept of private property that was invented by these folks who came over here and decided that that's what they were going to do.
Okay.
Perfect timing.
Yes, let's have a little round of applause. An energizer. And of course, at an event about housing and labor, right, we have a labor, this was a question of labor, right? So I appreciate all of you for bearing with us. And it is what it is. Those of you accustomed to CUNY know sometimes things don't go according to plan. And I also just want to apologize to our speaker who was in the middle of this. I was so engrossed by your presentation, all of your presentations, but I also heard there was stuff going on up there, and I was like, uh-oh, what's going to happen?
So he gets an extra 5 minutes.
Yeah. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so apologies for the interruption, folks. So we're in Torreon, New Mexico, on the eastern edge of the Navajo Nation. It's called the checkerboard area of the Navajo Nation. It's called that because in the late 19th century, there was a policy initiated by the United States government to privatize Indian land. And that's where we left off before our break. Okay. So today there is a new attack on the indigenous home, and that attack is in the form of austerity. In 1996, there was something called the Native American Housing Self-Determination Act that established something called the Indian Housing Block Grant. And since 1996, despite inflation and the Native population being one of the fastest growing demographics in the United States, Indian Housing Block Grant funding has not gone up a penny. So that means that tribes throughout the United States are working with 2/3 as much money in real terms today as they were in 1996 when the block grants were established. Nonetheless, many have actually maintained the same amount of housing production in 2016, 2017 as they were doing 20 years ago. So despite what you might have heard about some Indians selling Manhattan for $24, we are quite frugal. Unfortunately, the truth of the Navajo Nation is that it's not one of those success stories. The Navajo Nation desperately needs to build as many as 50,000 units of housing to house its 175,000 residents strewn across Arizona and New Mexico. Many of these residents, we can hit the next slide, although our friends can't see it anymore. Many of these residents survive by herding sheep. That's what the Wakazu and Sandoval family does on their homestead on the Torreon Agency of the Navajo Nation. The day that I first went to go visit them, Joe Jr., Joe's son, lost the family inheritance, the sheep in the picture, and had to go tramping across the high desert to go find them. I think, as he said it, to me, sheep are awesome. You can hit the next one. The Sandoval family, the Wakazu Sandoval family, allotment puts them actually ahead in terms of the political economy of housing on the Navajo Nation because they actually have access to land. If you are an average Navajo citizen and you're looking for an affordable home, you have two options. You can either put your name on the Navajo Housing Authority's wait list, which is New York City, think about like NYCHA, would be about the equivalent. And the wait lists there run for years. The upside of getting a Navajo Housing Authority home is that you could actually live for free. You don't have to pay a penny in rent. So if you get into NHA, which is, again, a game of very small fractions, you get a roof over your head, which is, in this part of the United States, is a significant accomplishment. The other option is to apply to get a home site lease. A home site lease basically gives you a plot of land, but it doesn't give you any of the resources, the capital, the contractors, any of that sort of stuff to put a home on that land. It's simply a plot out in the desert. And again, the wait list for that and the fees that you have to pay to get into it are quite prohibitive for many Navajo citizens. But again, compared to the rest of the Navajo citizens, the Sandoval Wakazu family is actually ahead. They have a plot of land. We can hit the next one. But that doesn't give them all the things that we expect for housing in the wealthiest nation in the world. Until 2 years ago, they had no running water. To this day, they have no electricity. On the Navajo Nation, if you want basic utilities and resources, you usually, we expect that there's a government out there that can aggregate capital, that can get those resources together and deliver them to you at your house. And the reality for many residents of the Navajo Nation is that that's not the case. It's not the case for the Sandoval family, even though they own their own homestead. So what do we make of this full story? You can hit the last slide. This is Joe Jr. When him and his sister were a kid, they tagged the back of the house that Joe Wakazu built with their family name Wakazu. What do we make of this story? Whether you are native in the city in Oakland, California, or living back home on the Navajo Nation or one of the many reservations across the United States, it's very likely that you are living in a state of housing insecurity. It's very likely that you face a threat of displacement. It's very likely that you are homeless. And if we step back and we look at the history of gentrification and displacement as it regards to indigenous communities, we can't tell that story as a story of the last 10 years. How then do we account for the federal urban Indian relocation program? How do we account for the continent-sized displacement of indigenous homes that is the foundation of this country? We can only tell that story if we look over the centuries, if we look over the generations. We can't tell that story of the housing crisis as one of macroeconomic cycles. We have to tell it as something of intergenerational struggles. After one of our interviews, Joe sent me a note he likes to write, titled My Gentrification Process. In it, he wrote, "What I showed you yesterday is the remaining bottom rung of the economic ladder, who nevertheless are still human beings despite their own personal problems. I help them because it helps me, and so that is how the love goes around." Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much to the Community Adjunct Project for putting these sort of topics together. I just wanted to sort of like, just sort of note a couple of themes I think that's come up, but my intention is really to focus primarily around sort of the labor side of things. My work has been primarily around labor, and so trying to focus a lot of my comments on that, but I do want to sort of signify a number of themes, this notion of the collective theft of labor, this notion of like challenging the terminology of housing and home, colonialism and land, and sort of all of those concepts. And so I hope that in the discussion we can get to that. Because if you think about also labor history and you think about housing and warehousing, it has actually different meanings, right? So in the sense of also that tenements weren't necessarily a positive thing. They were intentionally set up to the benefit of capital during the industrial period, right? So I think that when we sort of think about some of these terminologies, what do we want to sort of push forward? What do we want to maybe sort of challenge? And I think that those are one of the interesting things for me about the last question of like, what can we learn from each of the respective movements, and really sort of think through how they sort of interconnect, where there might be also challenges and conflicts, as was mentioned earlier. The other things I want to also signify, my work is transnational, so I work with low-wage workers here, predominantly immigrant workers, but I also root my work in Bangladesh, and so a lot of the issues that are happening now regarding the brutal displacement of Rohingya refugees in camps in Bangladesh, also in Bangladesh in in the northern part, the displacement of indigenous communities, and so who were actually brought from during British colonialism to Bangladesh for tea workers. So essentially they're plantation workers for making sort of global tea and other sort of products. So this idea that colonialism, theft, displacement is something historical that's not presently occurring. So for me as a labor advocate, it's really interesting to sort of think through what are the kind of economic processes that actually serve both, as I think Sam had mentioned earlier, this real estate state, the collective theft, it's pretty much existent if you look at sort of labor history. So I was, like I mentioned, is going to focus primarily around labor, a lot of it in New York City. So, but if those who are interested in these other issues, I'm very much kind of also committed to that. The other thing I wanted to also mention historically in terms of labor rights, the National Labor Relations Act, specifically, this is the right to organize that was given in the 1930s, it specifically excluded domestic workers, right? Because they were oftentimes live-in workers. They're oftentimes not given the full overtime rights, right? So when you think about the theft of labor, of workers, because of the notion that, well, they're living in the home, so you got a deal, right? Same thing is true also for supers who, well, they are oftentimes exempt from a lot of wage laws because they get the supposedly benefit of a home. But this shouldn't be. There are two separate benefits. One shouldn't cancel out the other, right? The other workforce, again, not surprising when you think about sort of the connection of labor and housing, is farm workers. Farm workers and agricultural workers were also excluded from labor organizing. Now, when we look at it just purely from a labor standpoint, we can see the issue about gender and race. But when we look at this through a housing, access to home standpoint, we sort of have this whole notion of, in the past, the company town, right? Mm-hmm. The company town is basically all facets of your life, right? living, job, was pretty much you get the wage and you give back, right? It's sort of this whole scheme, if you will. But those concepts do carry through to the present day. So I think for me, these connections are very much direct. We don't have to necessarily sort of think, oh, how are they connected? They're connected historically embedded through the laws, very much. And also conceptually, as we're thinking about sort of home, displacement, and gentrification, right? We talk about gentrification, displacement here, but we don't talk about internalized colonialism, imperialism in the United States. That's always out there. But I think there's usefulness in sort of seeing all these concepts. So labor. So I think let's get the easy one out of the way, which is the National Council of Low-Income Housing has said that minimum wage workers cannot afford housing in any state. Not even $15 an hour. So the fight for 15, even if you get it, you're not going to get it in New York until the end of this year, right? Right now, the wage is like 13 over 10 employees, right? You cannot afford any rent in any state. So just kind of on a very basic level of, and we can contest, and I think Susanna's going to talk about just even the concept of wage and all of that, but just on a very fundamental level, where things are now, based on the wage, the minimum wage, people cannot afford housing. And so, and if you live in any working class neighborhood, I live in Harlem, so definitely want to connect with all the upper, we need to like work together. It's a common scenario. If you're at 125th Street, someone with a backpack, and they're asking you to swipe me in, right? Because they're making the choice, if you do the math, right? You're making the choice really between rent, food, I think the basics, and transportation. It's easier to get rid of the transportation, right? Food is probably sometimes going away because even though the criteria is 30% of your income should go to rent, that's actually not the reality, right? We know that. So then we also, when you think about back in the day when I grew up, well, if you couldn't afford the token, right? That's how, this would date myself, right? Is you jumped it or you just kind of slide it and you go through, right? Those of you who are older will know. But there wasn't the criminalization of public spaces, right? Because you might wonder, why doesn't people just like jump the turnstile? Like, why do they care? Because if you do that now, you will be arrested. So when you look at also the issue about regulation of labor, regulation of space, right? The criminalization of space. So the sister somewhere here was mentioning about broken windows policy, right? So the whole concept of space, where you are able to stand, to be, to exist, is criminalized. Because the idea is if you're just hanging out, you might be up to some crime, and therefore it is justified for you to be criminalized, right? Myself, in 2014, being arrested because I was doing precisely that, right? So the criminalization of public space, the whole idea of your right to even exist, to be, right? We're really at that sort of really fundamental level. So let's begin back to kind of what are the more intangible, what are the sort of, so those are the like, we know this, right? So I don't want to sort of spend time really diving deep on those concepts, but I wanted to like highlight the intangible ways maybe that we're not thinking about that labor and housing are deeply connected. And particularly because this is a CUNY Adjunct project, the way in which precarious labor, right? The insecurity of your, because, you know, if you think about sort of the change of the economy of the 80s and the 90s with neoliberalism, deregulation of laws, right? When you think about sort of that process and how labor has become the decline of union membership, right? So there's been also the increased precarity of labor, which means you can't, there was a time actually, right, that at least there was a sense of a guaranteed income. That most households were part of some union. Myself, my mother was part of 1199. I know there's some challenges, some critique, but she's benefiting from a pension right now. So there was some sense of security from that we've now lost. So precarity and housing sort of are also deeply connected. So what's happening? If you can't afford the rent, if the wages, real actual income is going down, then you have overcrowding of apartments. You have apartments that are where you have multiple families, but then we also have laws and rules regarding how many people can live in a particular apartment. That leads to eviction, right? And I just want to give a little shout out to Shahana Hanif, who was an organizer at CAD. Maybe she'll talk about her work in Queens with public housing residents and the issue of how this notion of overcrowding, because most immigrant laborers or workers oftentimes are even paid lower than the minimum wage. And so there you actually have multiple families living in housing. So you have the double of overcrowding, but then you also have the sort of fear of immigration status. And so this is how the overcrowding of apartments is also sort of, and this definitely is more of an urban issue. East Harlem, years back, my sister was from Movimiento, worked with them when I was in legal services. Landlords began to ask, this was about 5 years earlier, right? Social security numbers, all of a sudden. So what we're seeing in the rezoning has been kind of in the making for many, many years, but all of a sudden, right? Your social security number, actually, which is not required at all for housing. It was intended purely as harassment, right? So the immigration consequences for certain communities to be sort of vulnerable. Then there's all of this sort of notion of what it means to be working, to be productive. And so the entire sort of housing market is based on the suitability of the tenant, right? Who's the good tenant, right? And who's the bad tenant. So the suitability of the tenant, so even if you do have a job, right? If you have say an adjunct job where your job is not secure, right? Then you cannot show a certain steady income reliability. You can't show that your income's not going up and up and down, right? A landlord is not gonna give you the apartment, right? And so there's this whole notion of sort of lack of reliability. If you have precarious labor, you're more likely than not to have a credit debt issue. Because working poor subsidize the lack of income with credit, right? And so therefore it's not surprising in the last 10 years that the debt collection companies, the corporate companies, the credit card companies aggressively sued and used in civil court. And so a lot of us who were doing consumer debt work were trying to challenge that piece of it. Once you have a housing court case or credit, some debt, you then go to look for housing, it's gonna come up in a credit check. So again, your suitability. So even though New York City Council passed a law regarding credit check and employment, they have not had a similar law prohibiting credit checks in housing. So I think Marina mentioned this earlier, that even if you get lucky to get the sort of affordable housing and lucky to have the income, right? If you are in precarious jobs or income that is not secure, you're most likely to have some credit issue. Ooh, 2 minutes. And you are least likely to pass the credit check and won't get in. And that's happened to a number of clients. And what we saw was it also disproportionately impacted clients with disabilities. Because clients with mental health issues have, obviously because of different reasons, and those who are interested in that, have credit check issues because connected in many parts to their mental health issues. So I'm going to skip over that. Under the law, there is what's called the source of income. So New York City Council has been trying to address that, which is that if you have a Section 8 voucher or public assistance, you can't be discriminated based on that. So when we talk about strategies, that might be a strategy to build up from to protect precarious workers or low-income workers in terms of access to housing. I talked about sort of the blacklisting. Public housing, if you have a criminal record, you're excluded. You have to exclude family members from your housing. So what are you doing in terms of creating these legal systems in place that really are meant to increase the homelessness, right? It's the laws are very much complicit in that. I think Marina has already talked a lot about the sale of NYCHA land for so the diminishing of housing stock. One of the things that made New York City sort of livable or for working class families is the diversity of housing stock. Public housing, subsidized housing, rent control, rent stabilization, mixed income housing. But you can see that affirmatively the real estate and other interests are attacking each of these rights. So it's the federal subsidies are being attacked on the federal level. But even if you look at the city efforts, they're trying to move through all these sort of programs to like get you to work. And it sounds so like, oh, we're trying to help you, but once you get into the work, you lose then a lot of your eligibility for some of the subsidized housing. So you're pitting housing against the ability to find sort of work as well. And then the last thing, just in the interest that I wanted to hope that we can talk about, and I think it came up a little bit, is this notion of culture and public spaces. Gentrification displaces what I think is just a really invaluable working class culture. I was thinking about sort of, people think I lie when I say growing up in the Bronx, yes, I actually sold magazines and like, you did these things of living in a working class neighborhood, of being in public spaces, being in the parks, being in the playground, that increasingly now is not actually available for working class people and communities. And so the culture that is lost, places that are lost, that are actually no longer going to be in my kids' imagination, right? But that's also a huge part. And so folks like the Young Lords, but folks like the Black Panthers, looking at like, sort of what do we do next, sort of looking not at like housing and labor as a sort of narrow transactional economic benefit, but that actually looking at these issues in communities much more robustly and vibrantly as having culture, right? As also something that's worth also protecting. So the last thing I think, what can we learn? I think both movements have a history of direct action politics and confrontational politics. I think both the housing and the labor movement have moved away from that in this conformist politics. So I'd like us to go back to some of those squatting, adverse possession back in the day, taking over spaces after the recession in 2008, people not leaving from their homes that were mortgaged. In Bangladesh, tea workers just like squatted on land and said, you gotta take us out, right? And so maybe we need to sort of think back at reactivating some of these more direct action sort of radical sort of strategies to really push back on some of this that's being taken place, which seems like across the city.
What a great panel we have, right? How much time do we have? Because
we have this space till 9,
oh, okay.
So yeah, we have time.
Okay, cool. I just would love, I know there's so many folks in the room with so much experience, so I'd love to get to you all too. So I had some ideas of what to talk about, and now I have new ideas of what to talk about based on the panelists. And I want to kind of start with, I think, the idea that we even separate labor and housing, like the idea that we're even asking this question, to me is a reflection of how powerful the right is in ideology. And that the struggle that we have isn't just about wages and housing, but it's actually about countering the narrative about what we're worth. And so this very idea that there's deserving versus undeserving, that so for the mostly Black and brown folks who are going to be criminalized by jumping turnstiles and then permanently excluded from NYCHA, not just their apartment, but actually stepping on the property of NYCHA, is ultimately a statement that they're not worthy to have housing that's affordable provided by the government. And what does that mean? And I think that, so I think that's like, that is a narrative that is still very strong in our movements, worthy versus unworthy. And we in our movements also often accept that narrative and make arguments to say, oh, but this person's college educated, they worked hard, they deserve X. But actually, I think we're in a moment where we need to be thinking about how do we make demands about what we need as humans instead of demands around what we think we can get. And also demands that challenge the narrative around housing as a human right. And actually that labor should be seen not just about how do we have better wages and fair wages, but how do we decide what we produce and who produces it and who consumes it. I think that's the place where I would really like to see conversations on the left, especially now. I feel like we're in this moment where we have a chance to redefine what we're demanding. And it feels like there's openings, especially with the Black Lives Matter platform. I feel like there's a lot of openings to be thinking about that. So I want to take a little bit of time to share some history, and I really appreciate the grounding in the fact that we're in Lenape land, in the fact that New York is centered in a colonial history of genocide, of dispossession, of slavery. The other thing that the Dutch brought when they came was, I think it's important to remember that the Dutch came to establish a business, right? And it was a business to hunt beaver, to sell fur, mostly to women, right, in the fur trading industry. And there's a connection around like what we think we need, so what products we think we need, that often can be gendered around, you know, what we as women are told that we need to have in order to be worthy, and then what labor is produced to extract those things, and then what are all the ramifications of that. So I think that's an interesting thing to explore. So the Dutch came to establish a business, but they also brought the land tenure and leasing system with them. So when they took the land in Manhattan, they bought plots and sold them off, so that you have the first millionaire, John Jacob Astor, like Astor Place. The first millionaire in New York made his money by buying land, and then when Manhattan was leveled, he was able to make a lot because people needed to move up north. So land speculation is also part of our history here in New York. It's also about how wealth was created and who owned land by the time that many of, by the time my ancestors came, my grandparents. So I think that, and actually the first rent strike in New York happened near Albany in the 1800s, which was the anti-rent campaign that were tenants, but they leased land to farm it. And so they were on rent strike, not just to protect their home, but to protect their work. Because if they were going to be evicted, they wouldn't just lose their home, they would lose their livelihood and their job. And they never saw those things as disconnected, right? And that rent strike lasted 20 years, for what it's worth, right? And then you have, and at that same time, right, so that's like the 1850s or 60s, or I'm sure someone can correct me here, right? At the same time, you have pretty radical organizing happening in the labor movement that wasn't saying we need better wages, we need fair wages. They were saying wages are inherently exploitative. That the fact that wages exist, they exist in order to extract profit. And they called it wage slavery. And they said we call an end to wage slavery. Mostly I'm talking about the IWW, the International Workers of the World, who at that time was really organizing in some of these company towns. And hundreds of thousands of workers were mobilized and organized in the lumber industry. They were also part of the free speech movement. And so they were the folks on those corners, on the soapboxes, and their strategy was to fill the jails. And so they would call people to free speech, everybody would get arrested. The cities at that time couldn't handle the jails being full, and that was a strategy to pass free speech laws, but also to build a labor movement. So there's a radical history that didn't accept the neoliberal concept of wages, and that we're working within wages, that there is no such thing as a fair wage. And I think that there's parallels around that idea in housing, that affordable versus unaffordable housing is also on some level a construct that we accept. And this other piece too, that you have to live somewhere to work, right? So how do you separate a workers issue and a housing issue? And that in some ways what capitalists, I think, were very successful in doing was saying that actually housing is a cost of the production of the working class, and we're going to externalize it. So instead of us, the owners of the operation, paying for housing, we're actually going to make you pay for it out of your wages. And so you have to make a wage in order to buy housing. And so we've kind of set up to have this kind of competition of needs. And so I think one of the challenges we have in building solidarity in the labor and the housing movement is that we've accepted that construct. So instead of saying, actually, we reject the idea of affordable housing, period, right? Because affordable housing, as opposed to saying community-owned, community-controlled housing, or other kinds of formations, that affordable housing as we know it is essentially the public financing of private profit. And we extract lower rents from it. But essentially what it means is, so even in the rezoning fights, where we were demanding deeper subsidies what we were demanding was to say, we accept this narrative that landlords have a right to make profit, just like bosses have a right to make profit from wages. We accept that narrative, and we say we want more subsidies so that rents are lower, because essentially the idea of housing subsidies is saying we accept landlords have a right to make a profit, and hey, landlords, don't worry, you're gonna make a profit on affordable housing. We, the government, will pay you the difference. And that's the housing subsidies. So we're gonna publicly finance private profit in the housing world. So we've accepted that we're fighting for that, right? That's HUD funding also. And we've accepted that we're fighting for higher wages. And so I think it's just a really interesting idea to think about how do we go beyond some of our current demands to think about challenging the whole structure of the system in which we're fighting. That's one thing. And then to the history piece, I would say that, you know, there were massive rent strikes in New York. So the first was in Albany. The first rent strike in the city of Manhattan was in 1904 on the Lower East Side. Mostly immigrant Jewish tenants who a year before had done a boycott around the price of bread. And then they saw housing and rent also as a consumer issue. And they said, you know what, rent is too high and we can't afford to pay it. And so the whole neighborhood went on rent strike, collective rent strike. Not because of bad conditions, not because of like, hey landlord, you're not giving me the services, you're not worthy, I have to justify my right to go on rent strike. Like, just rent is too high and you should reduce it and make less profit. And they were successful in that rent strike. And then you have a series of rent strikes that are often also led and supported by left political parties. So after the First World War, it was like the rent strikes in 1917 and 1918 in Manhattan, in the Bronx, that are mainly supported by the Socialist Party. And they're demanding rent reductions by 15%. They're demanding better conditions. They're demanding a moratorium on evictions. Then you have the Red Scare, the pushback, and we have maps of New York that are shaded in color based on people's activity in the Socialist Party. Mm-hmm. And the precursor to the blacklist in New York is actually the red list, where if you went on rent strike, there was a red list and your name got on that list and landlords didn't rent to you. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. Then you have the 1930s, which I just find very inspiring, frankly. So you have the Communist Party supporting workers through what they call what were the unemployed councils. So you have the Great Depression, you have a lot of folks who are unemployed, and people are coming to these unemployed councils meetings, and as unemployed folks, they're launching rent strikes because they're saying, as workers, one of the consequences of not having a job, and our job as people that organize workers, is to provide housing and to fight against the consequences of not having a job, which is eviction. Mm-hmm. And so they don't see it as a separate issue at all. In fact, it's one of the main things they take up. In fact, at one point in the Bronx, I think there's something like 200 buildings on rent strike in the 1930s, all at once. There are entire neighborhoods that are on rent strike. And what the Communist Party does at that time is, if the landlord was successful in evicting somebody, they organized and they picked up their furniture and they moved it back in, time after time after time. And a lot of people were evicted and a lot of people lost their homes, but the orientation around the action was, you know what, we're gonna be evicted, we're gonna fight. If we're gonna be evicted anyway, we might as well go on fighting. We might as well organize. And at that time, you had something like 4,000 people show up to one rally for one family that was being evicted. So, and then of course you have the McCarthy era. So you have a lot of stuff, you have this radical tradition where there is no separation. And my sense a little bit is, and I'm really interested in your thoughts, like I think the separation, where we start to think of them as separate issues, really begins with kind of the neoliberal world we live in. And so I think that in order to challenge that narrative and to challenge the moment we're in, we can't just say I work on workers' issues and I work on tenants' issues. No, tenants' issues are workers' issues. And workers' issues are housing issues and issues of home and place and space. So I think that's an important piece to ground us in. I think, how am I doing? 2 minutes, okay. What else do I want to say? I want to say that I think we are in a moment to be thinking about what does solidarity mean. And how can we show up in a way where we're willing to risk something? Like, can we be really willing to risk losing? So what I see happen in the movements, and I think one of the challenges is that there's a spectrum in the movement. So I don't know how we can say a labor movement or a tenant movement. There's a real range within the tenant organizing in New York. There's a real range within the labor organizing in New York. So for example, like Sam was saying, in the Jerome Avenue rezoning fight, before the final vote at a hearing, 32BJ actually didn't take a position. They came to testify to say like the good things about the rezoning, but they didn't say yes or no. The Hotel Trades Council testified in support of the rezoning. And this is a rezoning that, community had mobilized thousands of people, put out their own plan, there's a 4-year campaign. So in the context of that, the Hotel Trades Council comes and testifies in support. 32PJ doesn't take a position, and the Construction Trades Union testify in opposition. And so you have this split, actually, in public. So what the Hotel Trades Council was saying was, we'll take the jobs, even though the hotels are going to be built by non-union labor, even within the labor movement, right? And so I think, and then what I see happening in the tenant movement and in the labor movement is we make an assessment that we're losing, and people cut deals. And so what happens is we think we're going to lose, and so we say, you know what, we don't want to piss off the politicians because we're losing anyway. We've made an assessment that we don't have enough power to win. And so let's just try to cut a deal and get out. And I think and that happened in the MIH fight, it happened in the Jerome Avenue fight, and I think we have to figure out, like, what does it really mean to win, and what does it really mean to lose? Like, okay, we might lose the Jerome Avenue fight, but can we organize in a way that builds power that can set us up to win another time? And is making that deal at the end actually a different kind of loss? It's not actually about the thing that we get, like the paper commitments. It's about kind of what are we setting ourselves up to build, and how can we make risks? Like, we're gonna risk mass eviction. And so one of the things in the Rent to Council Coalition I've been thinking about, and the organizing groups have been talking about, is how do we really ground this kind of like eviction defense? How could we think about defending our neighborhoods, not leaving, showing up to do eviction blockades, but cross-collaboration around immigration defense or NYPD raids? Like, how could we think on a neighborhood-based level to kind of build these defense networks to stay, to build? Because one of the challenges to build this different world is that we're losing our people. And so we have to figure out how to stay, to build these connections, to fight. And I think solidarity is key, and I think remembering that labor and housing aren't separate, haven't historically been separate. It's a new reality that is separate, should help us think about that.
Yeah, actually, we could also just applaud the labor of our speakers, again, collectively. Had tons of provocative ideas that I could barely get all down. We could move now, we do have a space until 9, talking about space and labor, right? Racial capital, colonialism, all, conspiring here as well in the space of the Graduate Center. We can take questions, discussion, thoughts. Also, if we could try to do an informal progressive stack where people who don't typically speak or feel comfortable speaking in spaces like this, we support them to speak, and people who are more inclined to speak maybe sit back for the first little while. That would be fantastic. And I can take a couple of thoughts with a couple of questions at a time, and then go to the panelists, and they can go to anybody in the room, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. And any other people at the moment? People needed time to digest, I think, mentally. A lot of amazing material. Yeah, and I don't have a question myself, because I'm with you all in this case. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Giannis Iligakis, and I teach at the Henry George School of Social Science. And now there is a reason why I mentioned Henry George. Actually, I've been saying these things for 10 years. I've been lecturing in political economy lectures, and especially when the fight for 15 happened, I was one of the persons who said that that's like and battle that even if we win it, still it's not gonna mean anything because the minimum wage used to be $3, then it became $7. It's almost like the dog that chases its own tail. So and people say, yeah, but it's an achievement. So I think the reason I mentioned Henry George is because he is the first economist that actually, in the 19th century actually, he wrote Progress and Poverty, and he uncovered the importance of rent, that it's through rent extraction that we enslave the worker. That's the number one thing. But his proposal is the most radical thing, and that's how we're gonna solve the problem we have with diminishing, let's say, budgets, state, federal. We are always going after a diminishing pool of resources, but we have an ocean of income, which is what rental incomes are. And I'm talking mostly the market rate incomes. Why do we focus on 15% of the housing stock, which is what we call the quote-unquote affordable? I mean, and that even preconditions that you pay 1/3 of your income for rent. Imagine what we call affordable, and we call that affordable. So, so I think we should focus on market rate rental incomes because that's the bulk of income, and that's coming out of workers. They may be white-collar workers, but in Manhattan, even if you make 6 figures, you cannot afford, you can only afford to have, a cage which is going to be your tombstone, and you cannot even afford to even have a family. A worker that makes 6 figures. So we need to empower these workers too, and not just focus on the lower ends. So the radical proposal, it was called in the 19th century land value taxation. Actually, Henry George was drafted by the labor unions because of his ideas to run as a third-party candidate for mayor of New York in 1886 in an election that's featured in the book Gangs of New York, not in the movie, in the book, and which was stolen by Tammany. And then again, he was drafted again for a second time. Now, land value taxation means you tax rental incomes, and that way, you make the landlords lose the incentive of rent inflation, and you make them either redeploy the cost of labor.
Can we try to keep the remarks a little bit more succinct as well?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I was giving time to people to digest and.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. Other thoughts at the moment? Okay, yeah.
I just want to say in response to your comments about the fight for 15. While I wrote someone referred to like tangible and intangible elements, and while I understand that it's not really practical for someone to survive, you need to make $28 realistically to rent 1 bedroom in the city. But there's also the intangible element. I know when I was trying to unionize people, making $12 an hour. These men, grown men, were making $12 an hour. And when I would tell them about the people out in the street of McDonald's fighting for $15 an hour, you could see that they had that like spark, that it sparks and inspired something in them. And it's really, it's terrible in a lot of ways, but it did emotionally kind of like inspire them to stand up for themselves.
So landlords immediately are going to raise the rent, so you lose that.
Right.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, but just I don't want to diminish people's fight for whatever it is. Even if it's $2, the fact that they're fighting is sometimes more important than the end result. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, thank you for that as well. If there's other questions, we can also throw it back to the panelists to reflect on either of those comments, to reflect on their own remarks, ideas that germinated. If there's other questions, we can take them out as well. Yeah.
I have a question, and I apologize, it's kind of basic. I just want to thank all the speakers first of all. You guys were great. And if it's, I just wanted to ask if you think it's feasible and worth working on projects that actively try and resist areas that are slated for redevelopment. Like if a direct action campaign mounted to save a certain area from being developed, if that is something that is worth organizing around, or if the fact that these have passed laws just means it's a loss and needs to be
Any other questions, points, or? you want to say something?
Just a comment on,
Yeah. And then we'll throw it back to you all.
I like the presentations, and I like the, I like everything that I heard. And just one comment for the last speaker, Susanna, was it Susanna? Everything that he said was fine. Except that I was wondering as to how, how do you also account, like for instance, you talked about the 1917 to 18 rent strikes, Red Scare, 1930s inspiring from all the unemployed councils, the 1930s Bronx rent strike, and then you jump to the McCarthy era.
World War II.
But before that, was there not also, like for instance, Robert Moses had already done his Cross Bronx Expressway.
That's later, but yeah, that's much later.
In the 40s, early 50s, right? Regardless of Robert Moses, but also there was a growing spatial mismatch, was there not, between jobs and housing. So for instance, the ones who were living in the inner cities, on the one hand, were increasingly separated from the new kinds of jobs that were being created in the suburbs. So the suburbanization process was also part of the, was it not also part of the
I can talk about that,
the
sure.
separation between housing on the one hand, where workers house themselves, and the jobs on the other.
Thank you. Let me take one last.
Over here?
Yeah, I'll.
Was there another hand? Did you have?
Yeah, back here.
I missed you? No, go ahead.
Take two more.
Okay.
Oh.
I'd love to hear more about organizing strategies and tactics that we use that are non-traditional. I heard them all. I heard the Lower East Side street gangs used to organize together, use non-traditional method of finding out who the landlord is and things of a visit. They increase the rent. Non-traditional, right. But hearing what happened in the labor movement, where folks would go to prison and organize inside the prison cells. I would love to hear more about historical strategies that we used in the past and how we can apply them in terms of modern day context. That would be definitely helpful as contextualizing the future. I know that, I'll leave it there.
Fantastic, thank you. So a couple of great questions about, I'm going to keep stacked, so I'll get you on the next round, and you on the next round. Got a couple of questions about strategy, and a couple of solid comments. You all. Yeah.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah.
And we're not going to stop. We'll always find some other method to continue fighting. Right now it's a legal battle, but it's not over. And yeah, we need to go back to everything, squatting, getting arrested. We're too comfortable and we're too afraid. And we need to, it's a dangerous time, but we also need to be willing to take risks. And I support all different kinds of groups. So like Picture the Homeless, for example, they've done a lot of squatting work. Community Voices Heard, does different things, but one of the things I supported was their calling for a vacancy tax and taking over the condos and co-ops that are sitting empty. So there's a report that there's 250 empty apartment units, and even considering construction and all that, at least 100,000 empty units, perfectly good apartment units, and we have over 60,000 homeless people in this city. And we need to be brave enough to demand that they turn them over. In East Harlem, we have buildings that have been vacant for 40 years on top, apartment buildings, and just commercial storefronts in the bottom, because the property owners can't be bothered with dealing with rentals. So now they've been rewarded with the right to build sky high up to 30-story buildings for warehousing. That's ridiculous. The city should have should have taxed them. There's eminent domain. There's things that can be done, and so it's we need to force them also to think more radically. specifically the Democratic Party. Yeah, so it's worth it, and we're not stopping. We need to be uncomfortable, and I guess you can talk more about the history.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So I wanted to say a couple of things. One is I think we have to. I in no way meant to dismiss the struggles. So yeah, I think the fight for 15 is an important fight. And I think that and we can't get lost in like, oh my gosh, it's not radical enough, we're not going to be engaged in the struggle. We have to struggle wherever there is struggle. And so I think the question is like, how do we think about, how do we understand what those struggles are? Like, how do we understand or have an analysis on the left that, okay, that's a reformist fight, but it's in service of. Like, what is it in service of? Do we really think that a better wage is the solution, or do we want to fight for 15 to build the power that we need to demand something else? So I think that's the question. Like, there are reforms that are for reformist sake and kind of justify kind of the liberal project, right, and individual rights. And then there are reforms that help build power and that are in service of liberation. So I think that's the question. Like, how do we ground our analysis? How do we do political education? How do we do mass-based building? And how do we engage in struggle wherever it is? And get out of this thing that a lot of us on the left are in, where we're like super critical and nothing is good enough, right? I was not on Facebook until like a year ago, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how like mad people on the left were and like how much we hate each other, you know? And in some ways I mean that in seriousness. Like, I think we need to support each other more and show up for each other more. So that's one piece. And then of course I agree with Marina. I think that's what I mean about the rezonings. Like, how do we define what winning is? And so we have to like register our resistance. I worry about like, what are people going to write about us? Do you know? Like, what are people going to be talking about 100 years from now? And so we have to register resistance. We have to think about how do we build power, and we have to build our skills of being resilient. Because we lose a lot. We're losing a lot right now, and we're winning a lot. And then we lose things and they take them away again. So we have to kind of figure out, how do we practice in community? Like, you know, we're not taught, like you were saying, you know, we're not taught the history of folks that were here before us. We're also not taught that we can create our own solutions. So we're taught that like, we need to call the lawyer or we need to call our elected official when we have a problem. We aren't taught our organizing history and the real history of resistance in this country across the board. And so I think we have to learn how to work together. We have to learn how to make collective decisions. We have to learn how to make hard decisions together in community. And I think that's a lot about what organizing is. And so in every struggle, we're building our capacity to work collectively to create solutions. And we want to know our history, right? There's like that saying about the bird that walks forward, but whose head is turned back. Like, there's like a bird, I can't remember the parable clearly, but like, you can't walk forward unless you know where you're coming from, right? That's the idea. So like, you have to know your history, but we also don't want to be limited by it. So there's no like golden, hey, here's all the organizing strategies. It's like, let's really study our history to understand what people were doing under the current conditions, what were limitations, what worked, what they were challenged by, and how do we create conversation where we're creating new ideas? Because like, nobody moved furniture back into people's housing before they did it, you know? And then Mark Nason, who wrote that chapter about the communist organizing in the tenant movement history book, talks about, I met with him recently, he was telling me about how the women in the Bronx would pour hot water on the marshals that were coming to evict them, and then they would take those like knitting needles and like pinch the horses' butts of the police, you know, and then they put marbles on the ground. And then if you were like reading around the squats on the Lower East Side, right? It's like, hold on. And then like you're reading about the history of the squats in the 90s on the Lower East Side and the incredible resistance to evictions and displacement really recently. I actually haven't been to the Museum of Reclaimed Space. I don't know if folks, I'm like trying to go all the time, but I want to go. So I think that there's so many ideas out there. I think to your question, I don't know how to tell the history of the tenant movement in 10 minutes. So it's challenging, but I will say that like, and there are people that can answer this better than me, what you have as a result of the Great Depression and where I think there are lessons to learn is like, is that the state tries, that there are policies that are passed that make it easier to live and sometimes quell resistance. So you have the New Deal in the 30s that actually creates a lot of jobs. You have the finance industry, like in terms of the FHA, the Federal
Housing Authority.
The Federal Housing Authority, and the FDIC that starts to regulate mortgages and insurance, so that the government will insure loans, so that if you make a mortgage to a person and I can't pay back my mortgage, that the bank doesn't lose money because you're insured by the federal government. So we set up that system in the 30s, which then gets expanded with the National Housing Act in 1949. And then you have this like project of suburbanization, right? That this idea of the American dream actually is a pretty recent creation. And so you have, and then you have, of course, the Robert Moses and all the money going into building this, to building the highways. And of course, and then you have World War II, where you have a real split in the Communist Party, and you have a lot of labor unions who were saying, we can't go on strike because it will hurt the war efforts. And of course, you have folks like Claudia Jones and other folks who are not supporting that, but there are splits. And so when you look at how the state responds, it's both with incredible violence. So the Wobblies were deported, they were murdered, their offices were raided. But then the state responds with some neoliberal reforms, like liberal reforms that make it a little easier, a little better, our social rights get a little expanded. And so the nature of the system is intact, but it's a little softer around the edges. So I think you see some of that stuff through the New Deal, and then the World War II, and then the creation of this idea that we have to have a home to be successful. You know, because it used to be proud to be a tenant. It used to be proud to be a part of a tenant organizing group. You know, tenants were a class, and we were proud of it until that shift really starts to happen. So those are just some ideas about how to answer your question. Yeah.
I'd also like to respond to the suburbanization question. I'd also just like to say, as someone who's been inside of a government institution, I hate the part of the left that poo-poos people who are fighting for the change that we need. It might be incremental, et cetera, but these are obstinate institutions, really, really hard to change them. So I don't think that we should overlook the potential of reform and real reform to enact radical change. To respond to the question, I think about suburbanization, I was struck by one thing that Sean said. I'm going to keep this concise. At the beginning of our talk, which is he talked about a real estate state. And I think one part of this that might get missed because we are at the beginning, because we are in New York, it's such a dense metropolis, is that the rest of the United States was built out, was built on abundant land. And that's the case in a number of other nations. It's the case in Canada, it's the case in Australia, it's the case in New Zealand. It happens to be the case in English-speaking countries that were founded on, I hate this jargony word, but settler colonialism, right? It happens to be the case in English-speaking countries where the indigenous population, the indigenous people, were deprived of their land. I think one way in which we can start thinking about why housing and labor issues are separate is the fact that we live in a nation where there was abundant land, where housing was, for a great section of the working class, quite attainable. It was possible to be working class and a property owner. That wasn't the case back in the old world in Europe, et cetera. And I think when we start thinking about that history and its relation to real estate, to property, to housing issues, I think we can start having really interesting conversations about the intersections of issues of labor and issues of indigenous dispossession.
Other thoughts? And did we address your question?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, yeah.
I just wanted to quickly also add that there are a lot of creative ways and things that you could do. So like in East Harlem, when developments go up and they have that green fencing and the work permit sites and all that, well, somebody, I don't know who, has redesigned those work permit sites to say Department of Greed, this property will result in displacement. And, it'd be great if they were like, we pasted all over the city, I mean, there are different things you could do to fight back.
Okay, great. So let me get. So then, okay. So you two, and then you two. I also just want to say, I'm very flattered to be mistaken, and then you. I'm very flattered to be mistaken for Sam Stein, but it was actually Sam who's had the chair of real estate.
Was it you? Yeah. Oh, I thought Sean said it.
I'm flattered, but I can't take the credit. So thank you, Julian. Thank you, Sam. So we had you back there, and then Jay, and then we'll take you, and you, and you. Yeah. It's been answered. Okay, great. Jay.
Yeah, I'm Jay Arena from College of Staten Island. Glad I came over here. This is a great panel, a great turnout, which I think underscores the centrality of the class struggle and housing and the inability to externalize it, as Susan brought up. And there's a great quote from Rosa Luxemburg in The Mass Strike that makes that same point. But my question is for Susan, Sam, actually everyone on the panel and the whole group, and it's around the organizing potential for us as PSC members, as workers, as CUNY workers. I don't think our union, the PSC and CUNY, have been neutral around gentrification. As Howard Zinn said, you can't be neutral on a moving train, right? PSC is a firm backer because there's no alternative, right? Cutting deals with de Blasio, the leader of this gentrification assault. They don't challenge CUNY's admission and tuition policy, which is gentrifying the student body, because that's not permissible under collective bargaining. And CUNY itself, Staten Island, they're leading they're partnering with the gentrifiers on the North Shore. Not Tom and Gotti, but the Hunter Planning Department is working hand in glove with these outfits. At the same time, we are in a strategic position because of our organic relationship with the students, the broader working class, to raise issues because we're whole workers, right? Not just at the workplace. Housing, free tuition, healthcare, cops jacking up our students, transportation down the line. And through collective bargaining, our leadership does not support it. It would be a fight, but we are well positioned to raise those demands because our students' living conditions are our working conditions. When they have a student in Crown Heights that's being pushed out of their house by these landlords, they can't do their homework, right? When they're low wages, they work in 40 hours, 60 hours. How the hell can they do any work? These are our issues. And this is a way, as we have seen in West Virginia, we can more concretely connect with the broader working class, but that will be a fight. And even among the left, there's a real, make a fetish of working class organizations, of the union as the only form where we are in a strategic position to raise the broader working class demand, which is the only way we can have the power to win and bring in the building trades union. I think that was a great analysis with Sam. We have lots of things to build. We don't need to build high-end housing and hotels. We need to build a mass expansion of public housing, public transportation, public schools. So that's what, and hopefully that could be the basis of another forum, maybe. Be great for, but you guys did a great job with it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question, first, the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space, they have free tours every Saturday and Sunday.
At 3. At 3.
At 3? Is it
3 p.m., yeah.
I recommend it. They're fantastic.
Oh.
And free.
Anybody want to go with me one time? I want to go.
Yes. So this question have been debunked, kind of. So I see the direction where this is going. So, but my question right now, maybe this is not bad to say, but right now, the reality is that there is a lack of affordable housing, and whether it's HPD or anybody, there's developers out there right now, the city, pushing for the development of this of affordable housing, supportive housing, all these things, not just the MIH, whatever that's going on, like actual structures of housing for purely affordable means. I'm wondering if, in your experience, what's the deal right now between, there's obviously a lot of nonprofits in the city that are pushing this and pushing for development, and then there's the city itself, city agencies, and then also private companies and private developers. And I'm just wondering what's going on there and what's the incentive? It just comes down straight to incentive. Nobody's going to develop anything unless they're making money off of it. So I just wonder what that is. If basically what I'm asking is there incentive to develop affordable housing for profit? Yeah.
Great. We'll take 2 more for this round. Go ahead.
I just probably wouldn't want to put a question mark at the end of this. As I said, working at NYCHA and being in DC 37, all the talks were fantastic. I got a writer's cramp from taking notes, but it's easy enough to see it all as one struggle in a venue like this, but when the rubber meets the road, it's the fact that so many groups are siloed that really keeps us apart. Even when there are 11 locals in DC 37 at NYCHA, they don't even talk to each other. Much as, God forbid, DC 37 talk to the Teamsters. That's like, The Godfather, where the families get together and Thomas
That's a good scene.
And usually, whenever I talk to community voices heard, I say, your landlord is my boss. We're both getting screwed, and your housing is being privatized. My job is being outsourced. It sounds like such a natural unity, but still, there's a huge distance between the residents. Even the fact, so they used to be, I grew up in tenant housing. They don't even call people living in public housing tenants. They're residents. Because tenants has a stigma, which I hate. Tenants is bad, So all I'm saying is that, and the other thing that really prevents us from building a movement is the illusion that we have friends in high places. It's easy, in the era of Trump, it's easy enough to say, well, it's the right wing. Bullshit. De Blasio and Cuomo never met a developer they didn't like. Cuomo used to be head of HUD. So I'm saying, so it much easier said than done, but it really starts at the grassroots because people like that, they bought into the idea that, like you said, affordable housing has been a noble but failed experiment, right? That's why they want to expand public housing. And so what I'm saying is, the fact that people have bought into the narrative that the private sector is successful, and if we can't have more public housing, really holds us back. And I would just demand that we need more public housing. I think really helps bring people together.
So I actually have a couple of questions. So I wanted to know, in terms of organizing and tactics, this is amazing information that you shared with us tonight. Do union members, rank and file union members, get this education so that they can challenge their leadership to make the right choices for the community? And then the second question is, in terms of creating resilient communities, because sometimes when you speak out and you organize, you get marginalized by the powers that be in the existing power structures in the community. So getting back to your point about resiliency and creating that move feedback, how do we create that? Because it's really difficult when you're standing on principle and then you get marginalized because maybe people feel like you know what you're talking about and that's a voice that needs to be silenced. So if you guys can answer, that question, if each of you can, answer it, so I can get different perspectives. You want to start with the union and rank and file?
I think there are a bunch of questions people have to answer,
Yeah, thank you. Those are all the questions are great. Those were great as well, in particular, I thought. Yeah, you go.
All right, quick answers to a bunch of questions. Jay, I agree with everything you said. I was particularly, Did anybody else get that email from the PSC about how we should all apply to the affordable housing status in town? Yeah, it was more than the asking rents in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
More than the asking rents. Is there an incentive to develop affordable housing for profit? Apparently, because the for-profits are squeezing out the nonprofits. So we can see this as a long-term transformation where housing for very poor people was not affordable. The government wanted out of the business. They gave money to nonprofits to do that work. The nonprofits built out the model and the for-profits are buying it out. So we need a different model if we want a different result. NYCHA and the silos, big problem, historical problem, not just now. I mean, Ira Katznelson has traced this back to like antebellum period, the city trenches of there's labor and there's community, and these are separate spheres. I think joining up with CDH to fight RAD, or somebody else to fight RAD, like RAD is a thing that will bring together the workers in NYCHA and the residents in NYCHA, because it's going to screw both in exactly the same way. Rank and file education is a priority in terms of getting the rank and file to think like the leaders. That is how the rank and file education works in most large unions. So we need an alternative system if we want to expect a different result. I've been interviewing a lot of people in the labor movement about housing issues, and one thing I hear from so many people is that the building trades are the most democratic and representative unions. They are not necessarily politically radical in any way, but they are representing what the members want. That is not really the case in many of the other unions. The education programs are mostly about skill building up to get a better job, which is important, but it's not political education. Resiliency versus marginalization. I can only say that the only way to avoid being marginalized is to organize, so that you're not the one sole voice saying, you know, the biggest institution in my neighborhood is wrong, but to build a separate base of power to demand something else.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. So I wanted to just raise 3 points that I think respond to the questions, and so I apologize. So first, and all of the question, I think underneath it is, I wonder if we trust our own power. So I just want to kind of lift up that when I talk about like what I'm fighting for, you know, from the position as from the labor movement, you might be in some other movement where we're sort of looking at this broader concept of when people talk about liberation, right? It's really about this self-determination as humans, right? Sort of back to what Susanna was saying about, you know, our value. Like you have a right to be here. There is no marginalization. I don't even know what that means. Like everyone else is marginalized, but not with me. Like what you there for, right? So first is that we have to first believe in this room our collective power. And so sometimes when we ask questions about powers that be, what do we need, what do we concede, what we are actually saying is we're externalizing that power that we have. Once we center that we actually are folks who have that power, right? So that's, you know, so when I think about that in terms of the current horrific Muslim ban, deportation defense, communities literally kind of like what back in the day with like, it's like, hey, ICE reporting, get out of your, move people around from their homes, actively like thwarting ICE agents, right? Like, I mean, I'm first time really proud of lawyers for like shutting down criminal court. So I think just like believing that actually power and collectivity can achieve liberation. So I think if we be honest, deeply, like, do you believe it? Like, do you all, like, to me, it's like left, right. I know it's very fashionable to like just on the left, but do we, all of us, really believe in our collective power? So that's first. And I do. Like, I feel like fundamentally, whether I'm going to see it in my lifetime, every liberation, revolutionary struggle is about that vision, right? So what are the obstacles? Everyone mentioned obstacles, right? Incentivization, value, why do we work together? So those are going to be sort of context specific. Political education is key. Changing the culture is key, like creative, active, like art is a key. I think the only way that union rank and file have done that is because there have been like these work hall meetings, right? This is important. And so we have to sort of build that culture that you are interested in someone else's struggle, not because you benefit. Everything is about transaction, incentive. So we have to kind of move. We don't talk about it in that way. And I think that's back to what Susanna was saying. And the last thing is I feel like sometimes we conflate campaigns, mobilization, and organizing. So when people are saying, is it worth it? Yeah, of course it's worth it. You do kind of analysis of whether this particular campaign demand, right? Like sometimes I will make very liberal reformists because that's what you have to do. But what are you giving up? What political power are you building? And unless we sort of do that analysis, like to me, just either or doesn't really make sense, because it's really about sort of what are you losing in this particular demand? What are you gaining? Do you gain some inch of breather, right? For example, you can say, what's the point of doing immigration defense? Well, it's to stop. Give immigrant communities a breather, right? In order to fight again. So I think just it's responsive to each of those broader questions, but I always sense that we don't really trust our power, that we actually have the power to, so therefore tactics can be direct action. They can be very basic. It could be, for example, providing shelter for someone who is dealing with potential ICE raid. It could be dealing with someone who is marginalized, loses their job because they fight, to actually like make meals. I mean, I just, on a very human level, sometimes we forget, like when you're evicted or when you're having sort of, you have the precarity, like what's our community care? What's our network of care for each other? Right? Like, I don't know that we're doing all of those pieces. We want to get like a strategic analysis up there. So anyway, I'm sorry it doesn't really give you a quick, but I've been feeling really like we're just giving up and conceding a lot. And so for me, it's just really about what is the tactics and strategy at this particular political moment? Will this expand political power for communities that I am concerned and about? And what am I losing, gaining from that? And then keep going. It's not a one-stop shop, and then we end and then we're like, yay, great. It's a continual sort of struggle and fight.
I'm going to take the two questions in the corner because I think they're related, and also because I guess I'm kind of the man who was on the inside at one point in time. So I think with regards to HPD and New York's affordable housing plan, which is not particularly affordable, with all questions of justice, I think we have an issue of scale, right? Like, at a certain point in time, you're going to need 500 homes to put 500 people into. With a history of disinvestment in housing at the federal and state levels, what cities do, and this is, I think, the path dependency of neoliberalism that we often sort of overlook, and I hate that term neoliberalism, let's just call it like the path dependency of capital markets or something like that, is that if you leverage, your let's say $100 of public finance, with private capital, you can end up building more units of housing, right? Those units are not going to be as affordable because there's going to be now a profit incentive for the people who own it. It's going to be owned by a landlord, et cetera. But there's still a fundamental issue from a public, like, government policy perspective of like, how do you get to the 500 units of housing? And I think the gentleman in the corner's point was really important, because the way that you can disrupt that is by insisting upon public investment, public subsidy of housing. But the issue with this in New York City is that the people who hold the levers on that sort of more democratic socialist type of policy are actually at the federal and state level. So there's actually very little that, no defense of Bill de Blasio here, but there's actually very little that Bill de Blasio could do to like implement the kind of public housing program that I think everybody in this room could agree is what we need.
Yeah, so Samali said that I know some of the work you've done, and it's frustrating, yeah, because I mean, I was on the community board, I served 2 terms, and it's very frustrating to have these fights and you're the only one in the room. And so the work that we did in East Harlem was very moving because people came from all over the city to support. If it's a lone voice from Queens, a lone voice or 1 or 2 from, the Lower East Side of Chinatown, it's about, building allies from wherever. And from this room, también, he stepped out, but I wanted to give a CUNY thing. The Silverman School of Social Work came to East Harlem, and they bought property. They sold 72nd Street property, and then they built in East Harlem. And the biggest, they're gentrifiers, but when they got there, they wanted to have a jitney, a shuttle, to take faculty from the school to the subway. And there you are. So I don't know if you know Silverman School of Social Work, when they came to East Harlem, they wanted to have a shuttle to take faculty and students from Silverman and East Harlem to the subway, the nearest subway. And we had to like shame them out of doing that. So yeah, we call them out. They're not victories, but we call them out. And I'm really proud to do the work that I do in all these different areas, because we're exposing, you know, and we're not always winning, but we're building more and more awareness. And I really like the ideas about all of this history, this wonderful history that I'm learning about here tonight. And I want to take it back to East Harlem and do some, you know, community conversations about the history of rent strikes, about the, you know, the labor movement, about all of this stuff. And we could do talks, we could do film screenings, we could do spoken word. This is like incredible, you know, energy that I want to take back to my community. So I want to thank you. Yeah.
Yes. I guess I just would say to your question, we do have to recognize that this is hard work. Often we have to unlearn things that we've been taught to do it. Often we go against our families to do it. Often we have to build new community to do it. So it is really hard work. And I think what Chaumtoli said about we need to care for each other, I think one of the like to go back to what I was saying in the beginning, the ideology pieces is that competition is also something we believe. Like worthy versus unworthy is something we believe. And so we also compete with each other. And don't think we're worthy. And so I think that we have to do some work to build community, to unlearn that, to say that change is possible, but also what are we willing to risk? And how do we build the networks to take care of each other? I think, so I do want to recognize that it's really hard work. I think for me, at least, I would say that knowing history is helpful. Like it's inspiring to me to think about whose shoulders we stand on and the work that's been done before us. And that organizing is the reason I love organizing. You know, I was doing direct service stuff. I did work around domestic violence, and it felt very like a little bit depressing, to be honest. And it's so important work. But for me, the shift in organizing to think about how do we politicize our personal experiences? How do we understand that our personal experience it happens in a particular context in a moment in time that's been constructed. And that, you know, like for example, in evictions, like evictions aren't your fault.
Right.
They're just not. The fact that rent is so high is not your fault. If landlords, right, the reason we ran the Right to Counsel campaign is about 50 to 80% of people in New York who are being evicted wouldn't have been evicted if they had attorneys. Wouldn't have been evicted. That's like 15,000, 20,000 households, or 40 to 60,000 people. That means that's not about the law. It's about power, right? And that means, and so this narrative of, oh, well, I haven't worked hard enough, that's a very entrenched narrative that we have to kind of fight against to say that we're worthy. I think that in organizing, I don't know, like I experience in meetings and in working in community with people a lot of hope and a feeling that we're building together. And so what kind of spaces does our organizing create? Whether it's a formal organization or informal, are we celebrating? Are we having parties? Are we dancing? Are we taking care of people's kids? Are we, you know, like what do we actually do to celebrate life in our communities to fight against the competition? Do you know, like this competitive spirit that is part of the neoliberal ideology. So I think for me, building resiliency is actually the organizing work and doing it in community and loving people and figuring out how to take care of each other and creating space in the organizing work that isn't just about campaigns. Do you know, it is really about celebrating and getting to know people and understanding our history and understanding our differences. Because a lot of times in organizing, there's so much internal conflict, it's hard to build. So I guess I would say that that's the piece about resiliency I think that I hold on to. I also think that the piece about being siloed I want to recognize is hard, that it's like But sometimes I felt like at CASA, it's like CASA members were choosing housing, but they could organize around anything, right? You have to organize around schools, you have to organize around police brutality, like there's a million things to organize around it's true, like it's hard to organize around everything. So how do we create networks to understand that our issues are connected and that they come from the same roots, so that in the important moments we can show up for each other? Because we can't all do everything, but we need to build networks on the left where we can support each other's movements and understand that they're connected. And I guess I would just say that I think that shame is a real thing. And that, so even in Right to Counsel, for example, we passed a law making it a right to have an attorney in eviction cases. And that doesn't mean people are going to use attorneys to fight their case, because we've essentially told them it's their fault they're being evicted. So we have work to do, not just to create rights, but to build power so that people claim them. And that we have to do in community and in support and in love with each other, I think. So it's not just about what are we winning, it's like how do we actually build the community that we can take advantage of the stuff we win and create new possibilities. So that wasn't a very direct answer, but I think we have to be thinking about that stuff and when we organize. But I think organizing should be, if we can do it together in a generative way, it should be at its core inspirational.
That was fantastic, and I also think you're going to move to conclude on that note, especially given the frame of partying.
Yeah.
Partying! We have a reception that you're all welcome to come to.
Oh my God, for real?
Floor, room 5396. And also in deference to all of you, because I have quite an eventful event. And I certainly appreciate you all for coming on behalf of the Adjunct project. I want to, applaud all of us. I did a little bit at the beginning, but I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, for sure. Indeed, you can also go to our website, CUNYadjunctproject.org. But I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards downstairs in 5396. I'm sure the panelists will be happy to talk to you all, and I'm sure all of you will be happy to talk to each other. So whatever configuration you find yourself in, you're welcome to join us. And I just want to give us all around the applause.
Follow you on Twitter, but I just wanted to I like the idea of film, conversation. I think it's going to be,
It's very nervous.
I have so much to say.
I don't have anything to say. Your message. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna,
I was like, I don't know, what did happen?
So don't forget, use your own preservation to have it work. I am so exhausted though. I've had a very long day, so I don't think I can.
I'm sure, and you were doing all the extra, you were covering so well during the break that we had.
Oh,
you
yeah,
kept talking, and I was like, awesome.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh my God, of course. Yeah, well, what I'm going to do is, it should stay up for maybe about 10 days or so, but it's also been recorded. So I'm going to get a recording of it and put it on our website. It can also distribute it to you all. And I think we can also get it actually on the Graduate Center's YouTube channel, which would be cool to have it, archived there as well. But I also wanted just to, I'm also going to process the honorariums for you all. I just need, unfortunately, it's just a small, acknowledgement of all the labor you put in. But we need your social security number and federal ID number. So if you could maybe just, and I'll rip up, I'll try to do it afterwards.
Is that all you need?
Well, I also need your address. Yeah, but it has to, the one thing that I could also email you, but feel free to write your address down. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. 5396. Yeah, whatever. Thank you so much. So we'll be in touch, one way or the other. Maybe we can work together. Thank you so much, Marina. Thank you so much.
I'd love to invite you to the organization. Yeah. Do you know what's in it?
I know, I found it.
I should just see to get oh yeah, fortunately require like but I'll shred this afterwards so nobody will get your information. Truth, I know, right?
Do you want to give me
I ran for office.
Okay, cool.
I didn't expect you to be
interruption.
No, I think that'll happen. Stories online.
Also get your kind of like study groups and stuff like
You're in sociology?
Well, Sam was the election.
Building is not.
No, it's great. Even with the disruption, the eviction.
That's how I do it.
Latinos are like that.
I do Latinos. It's like, oh yeah, this is just great. It's like, oh, I
Well, they're going to be involved. No, that was yeah, that's what I got on the
Give me a vibe.
They didn't want to go against it. Strike against it.
So you have to go transactional,
Bring up your point about
Well, until they give a shout out.
That's what they did. You guys can get a turnout, I think.
There was actually not all those trends.
Thank you.
So there's a bunch of these kind of